Chapter 1. I wake up somehow knowing exactly what just happened to me. A few moments ago I was just like any other 24-year-old fresh out of an engineering degree, half of which was done online due to COVID. I was excited to start my career and make a name for myself. However, my job quickly became overwhelming as I realized that I didn't have the skills or knowledge that I thought I did. I was filled with self-doubt and fear that I would be fired, and eventually I made the stupid decision to quit. The next 6 months were a struggle for me as I struggled to find employment and felt like a failure. My parents, who had always told me that I was a genius, were disappointed in me, and I fell into a deep depression. To cope with my emotions, I turned to my old unhealthy habits of drinking and getting stoned. One night, after drinking heavily, I made the reckless decision to get behind the wheel. The bright lights and loud noises were the last things I remembered before everything went black. Now, I had read a fair share of fanfiction in my life, but I was still not prepared to wake up as what I assumed to be the body of a 15-year-old boy in an alleyway in a medieval town covered in snow. Whatever being that landed me here at least drilled into my head that I had been ice-skayed, so I wouldn't waste time denying the truth. The fact that it was a medieval world was probably some sort of lesson about how bad life could actually be because of all the complaining I had done in my last life. I lay in the snow for a few moments, trying to wrap my head around what had happened, and I knew I couldn't just stay there. I had to try and figure out where I was and what was going on. So, with a mix of fear and determination, I got up and ventured out into the snowy town. As I walked through the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was completely out of my depth. After walking around for a good hour, most of which was spent admiring the snow, I was originally from India and had never seen snow with my own eyes before. I had gathered some information about my surroundings. From what bits and pieces of conversation I could overhear on the street, the good news was that everyone was speaking English, albeit with a British accent. The bad news was that I also heard a few mentions of the name Winterfell and Stark, which could only mean one thing. Fuck, I'm in Game of Thrones, I thought as the realization dawned on me. While some people might cheer at that discovery, I was on the verge of a panic attack. The logical part of my brain made my legs walk towards the outskirts of the town, so I could have my mental breakdown in a place where no one could see me, instead of on a busy street. Once I found a secluded spot, I sat down on the ground with my back against a wall and tried to think of what I could do from the situation I found myself in. As I sat there, a wave of emotions crashed over me. I was overwhelmed by the sudden change in circumstances and the realization that I was now in the world of Game of Thrones. Fear, anxiety, and confusion all competed for dominance in my mind. I knew I needed to come up with a plan, but I wasn't sure where to start. As I sat there, trying to come to terms with my situation, a sense of despair and hopelessness washed over me. So I'm in Westeros, in the body of a 15-year-old peasant with no food or money. I'm not sure what year it is, but based on the vibe of the town, I don't think there is a war going on. Ideally, this is the time when my gamer system would activate and I could chill with the knowledge that I'm eventually going to be an overpowered god. Okay, fuck it, no gamer system. But I've gotta have some superpower, right? As I muttered the words to myself, I couldn't help but feel frustrated and angry. I had no idea what had happened to me or how I was going to get out of this mess. All I knew was that I was completely out of my depth, and that filled me with a sense of fear and uncertainty. After 20 minutes of doing stupid power-up poses, I got nothing. Frustrated, I punched the wall, and all I got for my efforts was a bleeding knuckle. Just as I was watching my bleeding knuckle and about to have another mental breakdown about dying from an infection, it finally happened. My hand stopped bleeding and the torn skin just got instantly fixed. It takes some time for me to process what just happened. I finally laugh like a maniac. I think I can work with that. After I realized that I had some kind of healing ability, I felt hope and excitement inside me. Suddenly, my situation didn't seem quite so dire. I had a superpower, and that meant I had some control over my fate. I still had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to survive, but at least now I had a fighting chance. I decided to go out of town to a nearby forest to practice my powers, as I didn't want anyone to see me trying to mutilate myself. After walking about 30 minutes into the forest, I looked for sharp stones that I could use to test the limits of my self-healing powers. After a few cuts all over my body, I realized that basic cuts and deep wounds on muscles healed almost instantly, but they still hurt exactly as much as they should. Not having the courage to cut off my fingers, I started thinking in a different direction and saw if I could extend my powers beyond myself. I spent about 5 minutes looking for a squirrel and another hour trying to catch it before I gave up and started looking for smaller animals. I eventually found a few insects that I could start experimenting on. As soon as I touched a small spider and tried to exert my powers, I staggered as a wave of information got downloaded into my brain about the functions of each and every cell present in the spider. It took me a few moments to orient myself, and I realized that my powers were much more than just self-healing. I basically had the powers of panacea from worm, meaning I could completely change the biology of any organic creature. As long as I had the biomass for it. As I absorbed this new information, a mix of excitement and fear coursed through me. On the one hand, I had the potential to do some amazing things with my powers. On the other hand, I had no idea how to control them or what the limits were. I knew I had to be careful and not get carried away, but I couldn't help the thrill of possibility that ran through me. After playing around with my powers for a few hours, I was now holding an unholy abomination in my hand. It looked like a mosquito-spider hybrid, twice as big as my hand, with really sharp legs whose main function was to turn things into pincushions rather than for mobility, as legs were pointless for walking when you have wings. Normally, holding a giant bug would have scared the shit out of me, but my powers had made sure that it was asleep, and I had somehow programmed its brain to follow some basic commands from me. As I woke up my creation, it opened its eyes immediately, and I flinched as I saw its black eyes staring at me. After waiting a few seconds to make sure it wouldn't attack me, I gave it a command to go hunt a squirrel and bring it back to me. It instantly flew away at speeds that should not be possible for something of its size. It returned in about 30 seconds with a dead squirrel in tow, hanging off two of its legs inside the squirrel's neck, and lands in front of me for further instructions. As I inspected the dead squirrel, I noticed that it had only 2 small wounds on its neck and was otherwise fine. I smile at my creation. Your name shall be Skitter, my little friend, for you are absolutely terrifying. As I gave Skitter her name, a sense of excitement and wonder filled me. I had created something truly amazing, and I couldn't wait to see what else I could do with my powers. At the same time, I knew I had to be careful and not get carried away. The potential for my powers was immense, but I also knew that if I was careless, I could accidentally create a plague. I knew I needed to think carefully about how I used my abilities and make sure I didn't cause any harm. But for now, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment as I looked at Skitter, my very own unique creation. As I started to think about experimenting with the dead squirrel, I was hit with a wave of exhaustion and hunger and remembered that I hadn't eaten anything since arriving in this world, about 8 hours ago. I felt like I would pass out any second now and knew I needed to eat something fast before that happened. As I looked at the dead squirrel, I came to a realization about what I had to do, and almost vomited at the thought. I knew I had to eat the squirrel, and I didn't have the ability or time to cook it over a fire. But I knew I had to do whatever it took to survive. So I begrudgingly used my powers to turn the entire squirrel into a thick green biomass paste and tried to make it as tasteless as possible before gulping it down. It took all of my willpower not to throw up the disgusting paste, and a few minutes after trying to get the taste out of my tongue, I felt the exhaustion hit again. Kill anything that comes near me. As I gave Skitter one last command before passing out, a feeling of desperation and protectiveness washed over me. I knew that he was vulnerable in my unconscious state, and the thought of something attacking me while I was defenseless terrified me. I hoped that Skitter would be enough to protect me, and with that thought, I let the darkness take me. Chapter 2. I wake up to the sound of someone screaming, a sense of panic and confusion washed over me. I look around and see the gruesome scene in front of me, with dead bodies of all kinds of animals scattered around me in a circle. My heart begins to race. Another scream draws my attention away from the dead animals, and I see a person screaming and trying to stop their eyes from bleeding. My mind struggled to make sense of what was happening, and I felt scared. I finally find the cause of all this death, hovering over the dying person like an apathetic god. A feeling of pride swelled up in my chest as I looked at Skitter just hovering over everything without a care. The screams of the man who is most likely a bandit, based on his attire and the dagger he was holding, interrupted my thoughts again, and I started to get annoyed. So I walked up to the flailing bandit, touched his head and stopped his heart, silencing the screams immediately. But then, a moment of clarity hits me and I realize that I needed a live human to test my powers on before using them on myself. So I started the bandit's heart again and just paralyzed him from the neck down. I called Skitter to me, feeling grateful for her help, and gave her some upgrades by giving her longer legs and a denser exoskeleton using the biomass of the dead animals nearby. As I searched for dry twigs and leaves to start a fire, my stomach growled loudly, reminding me of how hungry I was. The thought of eating another bland green biomass paste made me shudder, and I knew I had to find something else to eat. After a few unsuccessful attempts at trying to start a fire by using 2 rocks, I found I have a brilliant idea and called Skitter over. I asked her to scratch her steel-like legs against a rock, and the sparks were enough to start a fire. I quickly roasted some boar meat, and although it was bland, it tasted like heaven after the disgusting paste I had eaten the previous day. As I sat there, eating the boar meat, the severity of the actions I was about to commit hits me like a sledgehammer. I've been in this world for less than a day and am already going to experiment on a person, kill him, and use his corpse to make myself stronger. The thought made me feel guilty and uneasy, but I knew that I needed to do everything I could to survive in this harsh world. Despite my moral qualms, I knew I had to be practical and do whatever it took to survive in this new world. I, after a few minutes of internal debate, decided to adjust my moral compass a bit. I will try my best to help the people that need it, but it will not be at the expense of my safety. With that decision made, I approach the paralyzed bandit lying on the ground and start to test my powers. After a few hours, I realized that I wasn't skilled enough in my control yet to mess with sensitive organs like the brain or eyes, but I could definitely make my bones dense enough that a sword would not even leave a mark on them, and I could make my muscles strong enough to lift almost anything. While a sword could still cut through my muscles, albeit with some difficulty, my regeneration would fix it in an instant. To upgrade my bones and muscles, I used the bandit's corpse and almost all the dead animals in the clearing, leaving only a few pieces of boar meat to be eaten later. I then looted the bandit's corpse, found a decent knife, a few copper coins, some clothes, and a satchel to carry everything in. I packed everything into my new satchel and prepared to leave the forest. I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear for the unknown adventures that awaited me in this strange world. After telling Skitter to stay hidden in the edge of the forest and to come only when I called her, I ventured back into the small town with more confidence than when I left it. I figured that I had put off finding out which stage of the plot I was in for too long, so I went to the most reliable source of information in a medieval town, the local tavern. As I take a seat at a table in the corner, a friendly waitress approaches me. "What can I get for you, dear?" she asks with a warm smile. I place 3 copper coins on the table and request the cheapest meal I can get, along with a large mug of water. The waitress returns shortly with a hearty stew, a pie, and an overflowing mug of water. I ravenously devour the food, feeling a sense of relief wash over me as I satisfy my hunger. As I finish, the waitress returns to ask if I need anything else. "Well, I'm a little lost. Could you tell me what town I'm in?" I ask. "Oh, you're in Mole's Town," she replies with a kind smile. "Where were you supposed to be?" "I was on my way to Winterfell when I got a little lost on the way. Could you give me some directions?" I ask, hoping for any bit of information. "Hoping to see the Northern Army come home, are you? You're not that far off. Just take the King's Road out of the village. If you leave now on foot, you'll reach Winterfell in 2 days," the waitress replies with a hint of excitement in her voice. Even though I am almost sure why there would be an army returning to Winterfell, I feel it is prudent to confirm my suspicions. "The rebellion is over?" I ask, my heart racing with excitement. "Haven't you heard? You must have been lost for a long time. The king and the Lord Paramounts defeated the Greyjoy rebels a moon ago," the waitress explains, a look of concern crossing her face as she realizes how much I have missed. "I see. Thanks for the stew and the news. Here's another copper," I say, pulling out another coin and placing it on the table as a tip. She gratefully accepts it and returns to the kitchen. After confirming that I have a few years before the plot could begin, it is time to decide if I should interfere with the plot. I am torn. On one hand, I am curious about what would happen if I disrupted the events that are already set in motion. It is tempting to see how things would play out if I interfere with the story. On the other hand, I am afraid of the unknown and the potential consequences of my actions. But as I walk towards the edge of the town, a feeling of excitement begins to grow inside me. I can't shake the feeling that this is my chance to make a difference, to leave my mark on this world. With a surge of determination, I make my decision. "Fuck it," I say aloud. It would be boring to keep the plot intact anyway. I'm going to go to Winterfell and see where the wind takes me. My heart is racing as I consider the possibilities that lie ahead. I know that this decision will change the course of the story, and there's no telling where it will take me. But that's part of the excitement, the unknown, the potential for adventure. As I leave the town, I call Skitter to me and tell her to follow me discreetly. I walk along the King's Road for a few hours, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety at the prospect of interfering with the plot. I'm not sure what to expect, but I'm determined to make the most of my time in this world. However, my thoughts are interrupted when Skitter notifies me of 3 bandits lying in wait for me a few meters ahead. My heart races as I prepare myself for a confrontation, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I know that with my abilities I have the upper hand. I approach the bandits with a sense of confidence and determination, ready to take them on. I smile and continue walking while mentally commanding Skitter to deal with 2 of them while I deal with one on my signal. As soon as I get close enough, they jump out of their hiding spots, surrounding me and pointing their swords at me. "It's your unlucky day, boy," one of them sneers. "Give us all your coin and we might let you keep your head." I stand tall, my fists clenched at my sides, and smile. "You'll try," I say, my voice filled with confidence. "But you will fail." The bandits looked at each other and chuckle, clearly thinking the boy was an easy target. But I was ready for them. At my command, Skitter emerged from the bushes and attacked 2 of the bandits, while I focused my attention on the 3rd one. I moved quickly, dodging his sword strikes effortlessly because of my speed and size. He was skilled, but I had the advantage of my powers and the element of surprise on my side. After dodging one more strike, I close the distance and touch his uncovered face. He drops like a puppet with its strings cut off. Completely paralyzed, I turned to check on Skitter, and saw that she had already taken down the other bandit. They lay on the ground, their eyes destroyed and holes in their necks. I loot all of their money and look at the corpses in front of me. Instead of letting all of that biomass go to waste, I start dragging them into the forest and ask Skitter to scout around for an animal, preferably a predator, that I could upgrade. I know that I can't upgrade myself or Skitter anymore without months of practice fine-tuning my powers. Skitter returns after I have dragged the corpses a bit deeper into the forest and beckons for me to follow her. As I walk, I come across a shocking sight that fills me with a mix of emotions. A dire wolf, pitch black in color, half my height, lies on the ground, breathing slowly, with 2 arrows sticking out of its stomach. I approach the animal cautiously, and as it spots me, it has no energy to do anything other than slightly glare at me. I slowly reach out to touch it, putting it to sleep and stopping the bleeding. The feeling of relief that the animal is no longer in pain washes over me as I make sure it is asleep. I slowly remove the arrows, making sure not to do any more damage, and heal its wounds. I then loot the corpses of the bandits, finding some more coin and a decent-looking sword. After that, I start working on upgrading my new companion, excited at the thought of having another powerful companion by my side. As I work on the direwolf, I realize that adding any extra organs or appendages to the direwolf would work against the predator who has naturally evolved over time. I feel a sense of respect for the animal's natural abilities and decide to give it basic upgrades, such as stronger muscles, denser bones, and sharper teeth. I also make it almost twice as big as it originally was, using all the biomass the bandits provided. Just like that, after a few hours of work, I have a huge, overgrown dog that is trying to lick my face. I had always wanted a dog in my previous life, but my dad did not like dogs, so it never happened. You shall be named Fenrir, because my creativity in naming leaves much to be desired. The feeling of affection and bonding towards my new companion washes over me as I calm it down and mentally give it a command to go and test its new body while trying to hunt something. After Fenrir runs off into the woods, I notice that it's almost dark, so I start looking for twigs to start a fire. I find a nice clearing not too deep in the forest and start a fire with the help of Skitter, and just in time, Fenrir comes back dragging a dead deer bigger than him with his mouth. The sight of the proud animal with its big catch fills me with a sense of pride and accomplishment. I whistle in amazement at the size of the deer, and it drops the animal at my feet and sits down like the good boy it is. I pat its head affectionately for a job well done and separate the good meat from the animal to be cooked over the fire. Just as I am resting while waiting for the meat to cook, Skitter, who had been flying over the trees, informs me of some people running in the direction of my temporary camp. My heart starts racing and my mind instantly goes into flight mode, but then I remember that I have powers now, and I have Skitter and Fenrir with me. So, with confidence in my ability to survive, my curiosity wins over, and I decide to go see who they are. Chapter 3. I tell Skitter to stay out of sight, and she instantly flies and hides in a tree while Fenrir, who was sitting next to me, goes from friendly dog to terrifying hunter mode. I can see the protective instincts of my companion kicking in and feel reassured that we can handle whatever comes our way. It didn't take long for me to reach where the commotion seems to be happening, and my anxiety turns to surprise as I see a group of bandits surrounding a young boy who is lying in a pool of his own blood, with an arrow protruding from his chest. I couldn't help but think, this place sure has a lot of bandits. This is the third group I've run into, and it's only my second day here. He regretted everything. The day had started like any other. After waking up, he had heard the news that his father would be returning home in just one more day while he was breaking his fast. With a smile, he had gone to the courtyard to train with Rob using wooden blades. He was getting better in swordplay, as evidenced by the fact that he finally disarmed Rob. However, before he could celebrate his victory, he heard a word that brought him down. A word that had been thrust upon him at birth, a word that he had no say in. Bastard. He didn't see who had said the word, nor did he care. It wouldn't matter anyway. Normally, it would not have affected him any more than usual, but this particular day was different. It was his name day. He had finally turned 10 and 1, and before the day even began properly, he was reminded of what he was born as. Unlike in previous years, his father was not there to help him. The weight of the word was too much for him to bear. He couldn't take it anymore. He ran away from the courtyard, ignoring everyone shouting his name, with no care for where he would end up. He was certain that anywhere would be better than being here where he was only known by that accursed term. But he was wrong. Oh, how wrong he was. He had run out of Winterfell and hadn't stayed on the road for long, and ran into the forest to hide in case anyone came looking for him. It had seemed like a smart decision at the time. Stupid, stupid, he kept muttering as he continued to run through the forest, motivated by the noises following him. He tried to take in large breaths of air to keep running, but the cold northern air just kept biting into his lungs, and his stomach kept reminding him that he had not eaten anything all day. You can stop running, little bastard. We won't harm you much, one of the men chasing taunted him. It entirely depends on how much you run, another added. Yeah, we mostly want you alive. Can't ransom a dead body, can you? Another chimed in. He kept hearing the voices taunting him, and their voices seemed to be getting closer. His mind unhelpfully connected the dots, telling him that there were probably bandits who were in Winterfell, had seen him run away, and decided to follow him so that they could ransom him off later. Panic set in as he realized that he could not keep running for long. He pushed himself to run faster, but his legs were growing weaker with every step. The bandits' laughter grew louder, and he could hear them getting closer. He looked around frantically for a place to hide, but the dense forest offered no refuge. He stumbled and nearly fell, but caught himself just in time. He knew that he couldn't keep running much longer. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, and he lost his ability to breathe. He tumbled to the ground, unable to do anything anymore other than listen to the footsteps approaching him. Fuck, Rolf. Why the fuck did you aim for his chest? One of the bandits cursed. I wasn't. I was aiming for his leg, but the little runt wouldn't stop running, Rolf replied. Now what the fuck do we do? We can't ransom the Stark bastard if he's dead and has an arrow sticking out of him, another bandit added. Oh, so that's what that pain was. I have an arrow in my chest, he thought numbly as one of the bandits used his legs to roll him over. He ain't dead, Will, one of them said. With how much he's bleeding, he won't be for long, Will replied. What do we do now? Another asked. Best we kill him and get the fuck out of here before someone sees us, Will sighed at. The lost coin and suggested he felt helpless, lying there on the ground unable to move a muscle with an arrow in his chest. He didn't want to die, not like this. He had always thought that he would meet his end in battle, fighting in a great war, not at the hands of a bandit with bad aim. A woo-woo. Just before John felt like he was going to pass out, he hears the howl and the bandits freeze in their tracks. He feels a glimmer of hope that maybe he could live to see another day. But that hope is instantly crushed when he hears a growl from behind him, and he realizes that the bandits were scared of something very big and dangerous behind him, and he was in no position to turn and look. From his very limited vision, he sees the biggest direwolf he had ever seen striding into view, letting out a fierce growl that sends shivers down the spine of the bandits. What the fuck is that thing? Why is it so big? One of the bandits whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Before they could think of running, the bandit who had shot an arrow at him starts screaming when something flies into his face and everyone turns to look at him. Rolf, no. One of the bandits shouted. That seemed to be their final mistake as he sees the massive direwolf jump and use the bandit's distraction to its advantage and quickly lunges at will and rips his throat out with a sickening crunch before anyone else could register what had happened. The remaining bandits panic and try to flee, but direwolf was too fast for them. The not-so-small bug which had started the fight picked off the remaining archers with its sharp pincers, while the direwolf took down the rest by dismembering whoever was closest to it. The sound of flesh being ripped apart and the screams of the bandits filled the air as the battle raged on. "Run!" One bandit shouted as he tried to flee, but was quickly taken down by the bug. The battle was intense, and the sounds of howling, growling, and screams filled the forest. The bandits tried to fight, but they were no match for the animals. In the end, none of them managed to escape. They lay dead or dying on the forest floor. John stays paralyzed in fear and shock as he looks at all the death in front of him, the giant wolf and the scary insect that had been mercifully ignoring him until now. He prays that they keep ignoring him, but that's when he sees another boy, slightly older than him, come out from the trees and walk towards the direwolf. He tries to warn him to run away, but no sound comes out of his mouth. After the boy reaches the wolf, the entire air around the wolf changes from dangerous to friendly, and the huge insect just hovers around him. The boy pets the two animals who still had blood dripping from their mouths and legs like it was the most normal thing in the world. I look at the boy, who is most definitely Jon Snow, laying on the floor looking at me trying to comprehend what he had just seen while still unable to make any sound courtesy of the arrow in his lung. I send Fenrir and Skitter away to start collecting the bodies that were spread about in the forest and approach Jon alone and ask, "Are you all right?" "Never mind, stupid question." That I shake my head and place my hand on his neck to numb his chest. Before he can protest, I quickly remove the arrow from his chest and heal the wound. He takes in a deep breath, sitting up slowly and staring in disbelief at his chest, which was now free of any holes. It takes him a few moments to speak again, but he looks up at me in awe and asks, "Who are you?" "The name's Elle," I reply. "What's yours?" "My name is Jon Snow," Jon said. Are you a mage? You can do magic, can't you?" he asks nervously, both afraid and excited about the answer to come. I chuckled. "You could say I'm more of a healer than a mage." Jon looks at me in awe. "I've never seen anything like this before. How do you do it?" I shrug. "It's just something I can do. Not really sure how." "Can you show me?" Jon exclaimed, jumping up to his feet and nearly bouncing in his excitement. "Unless you are leaking blood from anywhere else, I'd rather not," I say, which calms him down a bit. Jon nodded. "Thank you, Elle. For saving me." I shrug. "No need to thank me. So you hungry?" I hadn't expected to run into Jon Snow outside of Winterfell, as I had never heard about anything like this happening in the story, so I improvised and helped him by dealing with the bandits and healed him so that he doesn't die, and to show him a small portion of my powers. Now I could just go to Winterfell with Jon, and that would guarantee me a meeting with Eddard Stark. I could show him my healing abilities to get a place to stay and a job at whatever the equivalent of a hospital was in this world. I could stay there and experiment with my powers until the plot begins, which should be about 8 years from now. After I got a good look at Jon, who looked about 11 years old, I continued to act like I didn't know who Jon was and tried to make small talk. "So where are you from?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I'm from Winterfell," Jon replied, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Oh, nice. I'm on my way to Winterfell too. You'll have to show me the way though, I've gotten lost twice already," I said sheepishly, feeling a little embarrassed. Jon sat next to a fire eating some cooked meat, opposite of Elle and Fenrir, who were also eating. He still couldn't quite believe everything that had happened in the past few hours. He had foolishly ran away from Winterfell in order to get away from the people calling him a bastard and see his father. His idiocy had almost led him to be kidnapped and killed, only to be saved by a boy only a few years older than him who had healing magic and 2 very scary pets. His mind was still filled with a mix of emotions, fear, gratitude, and confusion. He was still trying to make sense of the events that had just transpired. He felt grateful to Elle for saving his life, but at the same time he couldn't help but wonder what kind of person was capable of such power and control over dangerous creatures. He decided to take it one step at a time and go back to Winterfell with Elle. "Do you want to rest for the night, or are you in a hurry to get back home?" Elle asks Jon after they finished eating. Jon looks a little embarrassed as he explains that the reason he left Winterfell was that he wanted to see the army. coming home and meet his father, and conveniently leaves out the main reason. He adds that if they left now, they might be able to find the camp of the army. Elle give John his best "are you fucking stupid" look, but then sighs and agrees, as he is also curious to see what a medieval army looks like with his own eyes. They pack up and set off into the night, with John taking the lead and Elle and Fenrir close behind, Skitter following them in the air. Chapter 4. They walk for a few hours in the night, and finally around dawn they see the tents of the army camp in the distance. It takes them another half an hour until they reach the camp, and a few soldiers stop us from getting any closer when they spot us after they see Fenrir, and I facepalm cause John had gotten so comfortable around Fenrir that I forgot other people would freak out if they saw a direwolf as big as Fenrir. Especially a fully armed army on their way back home. So I tells Fenrir to sit down, and I sit down with him while using him as back support, and I tell Skitter to fly high so that she couldn't be spotted. The soldiers look like they couldn't process what they were seeing, and John goes up to the few soldiers he recognized to explain the situation before any misunderstanding could happen. John approaches the soldiers, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Jory, it's me, John," he says, trying to keep his voice steady. One of the soldiers, a tall man with a thick beard, looks at him in surprise. "John? What are you doing out here? And who's that with the direwolf?" "I wanted to see the army coming home and meet my father," John explains. "I got lost on my way back and they saved me from some bandits." The soldier looks at him in disbelief. "I'll take you to Lord Stark right away. Tell your friends to wait where they are until Lord Stark decides how to proceed." John nods, relieved. "Thank you," he says, and tells Elle to wait there before following the soldier into the camp. Seeing John go into the camp, I continue to rest on Fenrir without any care for the increasing number of soldiers coming to gawk at us, and think of one of the problems that I had been putting off until now. I touch the grass under my feet and try to use my powers, and I scan it. I get the information about its cells immediately, but frustratingly I also learn that trying to change anything even small in the grass would leave me exhausted immediately, almost as if it resisted my powers to an extreme degree. It was something that puzzled me, but I wasn't in any immediate rush to figure it out. John followed Jory into the tent and saw his father, Eddard Stark, sitting at a table writing some letters. Ned's eyes widened in surprise as he looked up at his son. "John, what are you doing here? Did something happen at Winterfell?" Ned asked, concern etched on his face. John's stomach twisted with guilt as he explained what had happened. He told his father how he had foolishly wandered out of Winterfell to see the army and meet him, only to get lost and nearly be killed by bandits. Ned's expression turned from concern to anger as he listened to John's tale. "You foolish boy. What were you thinking? You could have been killed," he exclaimed. John hung his head, ashamed of his actions. "And what of this maid you mentioned? The one with the direwolf?" Ned asked, his voice calmer but still filled with anger and suspicion. "He's waiting outside the camp, father. The soldiers were frightened by the direwolf," John replied. Ned let out a sigh and shook his head. "I'll send for him and we'll hear his story. But you, John, I'll decide your punishment after we return to Winterfell." John nodded, knowing his father was right. He had acted foolishly and was lucky to be alive. He vowed to be more careful in the future and to listen to the advice of those wiser than himself and not let what others call him affect him. After a few minutes, one of the soldiers slowly approaches me and says, "Follow me." "Can I bring Fenrir with me?" I ask, gesturing towards the large direwolf by my side. The soldier hesitates for a moment before asking, "Are you sure he's not going to attack anyone?" I nod confidently. As you can see, he hasn't done anything yet, and he won't do anything unless someone comes at us with a sword or something. The soldier nods. "All right, you can bring the wolf. What's your name?" I ask while following him, trying to make small talk. "William," the soldier replies without saying anything else and just leads the way. The soldiers create a path, and I confidently walk behind William, my heart beating with excitement. They reach what looked to be the main tent, and John and Eddard Stark walk out. Eddard looks as surprised as everyone when he sees me and Fenrir. "Father, this is Elle and Fenrir. They saved me from the bandits. Fenrir fought off the bandits and Elle healed me after I was shot with an arrow in my chest," John said, trying to hide his nervousness as he introduced us. Eddard Stark looked exactly as I had imagined, down to the smallest detail, especially his expression. He looked at me and Fenrir and then lingered on my direwolf for a few moments. Finally turning back to me, he asked, "Elle, do you not have a last name? Where are you from?" "I'm just an orphan, not from any particular place," I answered, shrugging carelessly as I improvised a generic backstory. And you just happened upon some bandits trying to kill my son? He asked me suspiciously. I was on my way to Winterfell and had decided to make camp in the forest after dusk when I heard all the commotion. The bandits were not trying to be stealthy, I explained. And what were you planning to do in Winterfell? He asked. Nothing much, really. I've heard a lot about the amazing castle and wanted to see it for myself. After that, I was planning to head further north to see the wall. I've heard it's quite the sight. Maybe I can offer my healing services in exchange for coin along the way, I replied. Stark continued to look at me, searching for any signs of deception on my face, but I was quite skilled at playing poker, so he wouldn't find anything. Finally, he stopped looking and said, You saved my son's life. House Stark owes you a debt of gratitude. I invite you to rest at Winterfell until you are ready to move on. I slightly bowed my head in response and saw Jon Smee ling at me from the side. Your offer is much appreciated, my lord, I said that. He nodded before continuing. You mentioned that you have the ability to heal. Would you be willing to heal some of my men in the camp? My lips curled upwards. Certainly, Lord Stark. I am happy to assist. Showtime, I thought to myself. Eddard Stark had seen a lot of things in his life, but what he was witnessing at the moment was not something he had ever seen before. He would happily admit that when Jon first told him of the boy who said he was 10 and 5 name days old, had healed his chest, which had an arrow going through it, he was skeptical. But witnessing the boy heal about 50 of his soldiers, with various wounds varying from cuts, stabs, and broken limbs, with just a touch, was not something he would ever forget. Looking at the expressions on his soldiers' faces, he was not alone in that regard. Eddard Stark looks at the boy with a mix of amazement and confusion. He had heard stories of sorcerers and magic in the world, but he always dismissed them as stories. But here he was, standing before a boy who could heal anyone with just a touch. He couldn't deny the evidence in front of him, that he decides to deal with it later. Now that there were no more injured in the army, he could march at full sprint to Winterfell and reach it by sundown. So he gives the order. The army packs up the camp and sets off. Lord Stark had apologized for not having a horse for me to ride and offered to have me ride on one of the wagons. I decline and just ride on top of Fenrir instead. As the evening approached, the magnificent castle of Winterfell came into view. It was a sight to behold and beyond what I had imagined. I had seen the castle shown in the show, but comparing it to what was in front of me would be an insult. The fortress was far more awe-inspiring. The first thing that struck me was the 2 sets of walls that protected the inner city. The outer wall was made of gray granite and was estimated to reach a height of nearly 80 feet. The inner wall was even taller. I noticed that the only entry point was a massive gatehouse on the northern side of the fortress, which was guarded by a real moat. I wonder if it has crocodiles in it. As I followed Lord Stark through the gatehouse and into the inner workings of Winterfell, I couldn't help but whisper, "Awesome." The inner courtyard was expansive and surrounded by numerous structures that made up the bustling heart of the castle. I was completely in awe of the grandeur of Winterfell and couldn't wait to explore more. As we entered the courtyard, directly across from us was what could only be the primary keep within Winterfell. The keep stood twice as tall as any of the other buildings in the immediate vicinity. Finished with my sightseeing, I straightened myself as the horses I was riding beside began to slow to a stop. As I start paying attention, I become aware of the group of people standing just before the entrance to the main keep. At the front of the group, he saw the rest of the Starks. He saw Catelyn Stark holding a baby he assumed was Bran, along with Robb, Sansa, and Arya. I kept myself concealed among the horses, observing Eddard Stark and his family as he dismounted with Jon and approached them. Catelyn greeted her husband warmly and affectionately, but her expression changed to anger when she saw Jon. The younger children ran up to hug their father, while Robb whispered with Jon after giving his father a quick hug. It appeared that the younger children were unaware of Jon's recent disappearance. There was another boy who I noticed for the first time, and I heard Lord Stark introduce him as Theon Greyjoy. I had completely forgotten about him. We stumbled upon Jon this morning. Lord Stark spoke to someone wearing chains, who I assumed was Maester Luwin. He would have died if not for the intervention of his newest friend. That was my cue. I was just at the right place at the right time, my lord, I respond respectfully. It was then that almost everyone noticed me sitting on a giant direwolf and freaked out as expected until Lord Stark calmed them down again and assured everyone that the wolf was tamed. He then proceeded to introduce me to his family. This is my wife, Lady Catelyn Stark of House Tully. A pleasure, my lady. I reply, bowing slightly. These are my children, my eldest and heir, Robb Stark. And my daughters, Sansa and Arya. Lord Stark continued. It is an honor to meet all of you, I greet them kindly. Robb, Sansa and Arya, however, both merely stared at Fenrir in wonder and said Wolf seemed to be enjoying the attention. Is he striking a pose? It was Arya who asked the most obvious question. Can I touch him? Arya. Lady Stark snapped, turning sharply towards her youngest child. Chuckling, I reached up and started petting Fenrir. You can go ahead, I said, smiling at the young girl. Fenrir won't hurt you. He's very friendly. Arya tentatively reached out her hand and stroked the wolf's fur. She looked up at me with a wide-eyed expression of wonder. He's so soft, she said. Lady Stark looked at me with suspicion. Where did you come by this creature? And how did you tame him? She asked. I found him wounded in the forest, my lady. I healed him and he's been with me ever since, I replied, still petting Fenrir. She didn't look like she believed me but didn't want to create a scene in front of everyone, so she just decided to leave with the children. Come, children, it is late and you need your rest. You can speak to your father again tomorrow. Lord Stark sighed, bearing a look of resignation at his wife's behavior. He then calls for one of the servants and says, See to it that Elle here is assigned a room in the guest quarters for the time being. Of course, my lord, the servant says, bowing slightly before holding a hand towards the side building next to the keep. If you will please follow me, I will show you to your room. I gave Lord Stark one last nod and turned to follow the servant towards what he could only assume were the guest quarters. This is going to be fun. Chapter 5. Ned entered his private solar after many moons, and it looked much more inviting than the makeshift tents he had stayed in during the rebellion, as long as you ignored the large stack of parchment waiting for him to tackle. Just as he thought he could deal with that headache tomorrow, he saw his wife and Maester Luwin approaching his solar and realized that he probably wasn't going to get much rest today. He sighed and sat down in his seat, waiting for them to enter. Maester Luwin spoke up first. We know you have just arrived, Lord Stark, but there are a few issues that require your attention. It's all right, Maester Luwin, carry on, Ned replied. He then went on to discuss some of the main issues that needed taking care of, like overseeing shipments of grain, providing more metal for the blacksmiths to repair and replace everything that was damages or lost in the war, addressing bandit attacks on the roads, and repairing harbors that had been attacked by the Ironborn. Thankfully, he only had to send a few ravens to deal with the main problems, even though there were a lot more smaller issues to answer. Luwin had the sense to push it back by a few days, and Ned was thankful for it. But he couldn't rest just yet. Ned noticed Kat's eagerness to bring up the last concern of the night. He turned to her and said, I assume you want to ask about the boy and his dire wolf? Kat's distress was evident on her face. Ned, she began, her voice rising with frustration, who is that boy? Why does he have that monster with him? It's dangerous and could kill anyone nearby at any moment. Yet you've invited him to stay in the keep. Why? Ned calmly explained. The boy possesses the ability to heal anyone with a touch, a skill that proved invaluable to the men in our army, a skill that I have witnessed with my own eyes, and he saved John's life. Without his healing, many would still be suffering from broken limbs and could have even succumbed to fever, and John would be dead. And I have observed that monster ever since I first saw it. It has not done anything dangerous, so it would be safe to assume that it is tame. Maester Luwin, curious, asked for more information. This is most unusual, Lord Stark. Could you tell me more about how he healed the men? There's not much to say, Maester Luwin. He simply touched the skin near the wounds with his fingers and the wounds instantly closed themselves. In case of broken limbs, it would take a bit longer. When I asked my men what they had felt during the healing, they said that their limbs went numb during the healing and felt perfect afterwards. The only thing he told them was that they might have to eat more than normal for the next few days. He explained. Maester Luwin was still uncertain. I'm not sure what to tell you, Lord Stark, he said. I'll need to observe him healing someone and ask him some questions before I can make a conclusive determination on what the boy is capable of. But I'm certain there must be some secret to his abilities. Maybe so, Maester, Ned responded with a strange look in his eyes. But what I have seen that boy do is not something I can explain as anything other than magic. So you've seen him use magic? Kat exclaimed in disbelief. Ned, what were you thinking? He could be using his vile magic on us, on our children, right this very moment inside our home. Ned let out a sigh and leaned back in his seat. My decision is final, Cat. He has not given me any reason to suspect him of foul play, whether he can use magic or not. I will not cast him out for something he might do. His actions in saving John's life and the lives of my soldiers have earned him the benefit of the doubt, at the very least. He has told us that he is just passing through Winterfell, Ned continued. Kat was quick to jump on that piece of information. How soon is he leaving? She asked. I plan on trying to convince him to stay in Winterfell, Ned replied. He doesn't seem to have any long-term plans, just aimlessly wandering from place to place. From what I have seen, he could be of great help to the people of Winterfell if he continues to use his abilities. Kat was clearly not happy about his decision, but she knew that once Ned's mind was set, there was no changing it. Ned looked at Kat, who was still unhappy. He decided to throw in a compromise. However, he is still new and we don't know much about him. He lied to me when he said he was from the north. His accent is very off and not something I have ever heard before. And the fact that he doesn't use his last name along with how well he speaks makes me think that he is the son of a minor lord who kicked him out when he started using his powers. Therefore, I want him watched discreetly. You can assign a few of the house staff to keep an eye on him, but stress that they are not to interfere with anything he might be doing. Maester Luwin, you can meet with the boy tomorrow and ask him your questions and see his magic with your own eyes, Ned continued, turning to the aged Maester. I would also ask you to not inform anyone of the boy or his powers. I'm sure that word will eventually spread about the matter, but for the time being I would rather not have to deal with that particular mess. Maester Luwin hesitated, but agreed to Ned's request. Good, Ned nodded, shifting his attention from Maester Luwin to the pile of paperwork on his desk. That's all, he declared. Kat was the first to leave, still obviously mad, but Ned hoped that she would come to see reason soon enough. She walked out of the solar with her head held high, with Maester Luwin following closely behind her. Once he was alone, Ned buried his head in his hands and prayed to the old gods that he wasn't making a mistake. Despite his doubts, he knew in his heart that he was making the right choice. If he can do even half of what I believe, he is far too valuable to let go, he thought. A healer capable of performing the feats I've witnessed is unheard of. I let Fenrir run off into the nearby forest. He wouldn't be comfortable staying in the castle, and I doubted that he would be allowed to stay in the stables, given how much the horses were scared of him, and I didn't want to make my hosts any more uncomfortable than they already were. The servant led me to a small room, which was surprisingly spacious, with only a bed and desk as its furnishings. I rearranged the furniture to accommodate my OCD. Behind a partition I spotted a chamber pot and I had to fight the urge to gag. All right, first things first. I need to either find a way to make a toilet or find a place to relieve myself in the forest. There's no way I can live my life using a bucket for my waste, I thought to myself. I then opened a window and Skitter flew in. I hadn't seen her all day and felt guilty for ignoring her, so I petted her for some time. For some reason John had completely forgotten to mention Skitter to his father, and I was perfectly okay with that. She was going to be my assassin in the dark, and I would eventually give her the perfect abilities for it. I fed her some of the food I had kept on me. I had initially planned on staying in the forest or staying on the move until I had a good grasp on my powers, but one night in the forest had me throwing away that idea very fast. Being on the move would affect how fast I improved my powers, so the smart thing to do was stay in a place where I could get a constant supply of people to subtly experiment on without much effort. I also needed to make sure that I only showed my healing powers or things might get complicated. My knowledge of this world was purely based on fanfiction and a few initial episodes I had watched, so considering all I knew, I had decided that staying in Winterfell where Eddard Stark wouldn't bother me too much would probably be the best option. Did I wake up the next day to the sunlight hitting my face? I lay in bed for a few minutes, thinking about the things I need to do today. I will need to talk to Lord Stark and Maester Luwin to probably answer some questions about my powers. I will definitely need to stick to the story that I can only heal people and nothing more, as admitting to anything more was plain stupid at this point at least, and discuss where I can set up my clinic to continue healing and improve my powers. I have thought of some ideas in this regard, like a sonic radar to sense people better and even night vision, but I would need to scan a bat first. I also need to develop some kind of ranged attack, but haven't figured out how to go about it yet. I also consider incorporating something like photosynthesis into myself to get more energy efficiently, because I have noticed that I was getting hungry twice as fast as before due to the energy I am using to maintain my improved body and healing powers. Maybe I could ask for training in how to use a sword, because swords are cool and it would be nice to have a way to protect myself better without overly relying on my powers, and it would also help me not stand out too much. Anyway, all of this could be done later because I was hungry again and needed some food. That's when someone knocks on my door, and as I open it, I see a girl about my age standing there nervously. "Lord Stark has invited you to break your fast with him," she says. I nod, and she then leads me to a room where I see the entire Stark family having their breakfast. "Good morning, Elle. I trust that the room was to your liking," Lord Stark says. "It has been a long time since I have slept on a proper bed, Lord Stark." "It was quite refreshing," Lord Stark nods. "You can break your fast with us, then we have important matters to discuss." "Thank you." I smile at the kids staring at me and looking behind me, trying to look for something. "Where's Fenrir?" Arya asks. "I let him out into the forest, my lady. He does not like being cooped up inside for too long," I explain. "Was that a good idea, letting the wolf run around without supervision?" Catelyn Stark asks in a tone that I was starting to find annoying, but I knew I had to be polite because I am in their house. "He knows not to attack anyone unless provoked, my lady," I say in my best HR voice. She still doesn't look happy but lets the matter go for now. Some of the kids look like they're going to ask me more questions but stop themselves when they see their mother giving them the look. I don't get asked any more questions after that, and I laugh internally at the absurd situation I found myself in and just eat my breakfast in peace. Chapter 6. After having my breakfast, I accompany Lord Stark to his solar to address the matter at hand. He looks at me with a stern expression and poses his question. "Your answer yesterday about your plans made it seem like you're just wandering from place to place." I shrug. "That's pretty much it." "Do you want to stay in Winterfell?" he asks in a serious tone. "I might consider staying, but I have something I want to do and I need your permission for that," I reply. "What do you want to do?" he asks. I responded confidently. "I want to set up a house of healing and provide medical care to those who are injured or sick." Lord Stark ponders my answer for a moment before speaking with a touch of sarcasm. "And you plan to do this purely out of the kindness of your heart?" Anticipating his reaction, I reply, "While I would never turn away someone in dire need of my healing, I do need to make a living. Therefore, I would charge a small fee for my services to those who can afford it. However, I'm open to suggestions, Lord Stark. Perhaps you could kindly suggest a reasonable fee for my services, as this is an uncommon case, and I'm not aware of the standard charges for such services in Winterfell." "Before we delve into any discussions of fees," Lord Stark declares with a note of caution, "you will need to demonstrate your healing in front of Maester Luwin and answer any questions he may have for you. He is the castle's foremost authority on the art of healing." Lord Stark continues, his brow furrowed in contemplation. "Should Maester Luwin find nothing amiss with your methods, I will grant you a manse near the castle to set up your house of healing." I respectfully nod. "That sounds fair, Lord Stark." "Best get this done immediately," Lord Stark declares, rising from his seat. He gestures for me to follow him to Maester Luwin's chambers. Maester Luwin awaits our arrival in the castle's grand library, surrounded by shelves of books and scrolls. Upon my introduction, I can't help but feel a sense of familiarity, as if I'm participating in some sort of job interview. But unlike my previous interviews, I have knowledge that the Maester could only dream of. "Could you give me a simple explanation of your healing methods?" Maester Luwin asks with a curious expression. "I have the ability to channel my energy to heal others," I reply confidently. "By tapping into a person's own natural healing processes, I enhance them and speed up the healing process, bringing relief to injuries and illnesses." I am aware that my explanation is a watered-down version of my powers, but I don't want to overwhelm the Maester with information he may not understand, such as the concept of cells. Maester Luwin looks at me skeptically and asks, "Could you demonstrate?" I reply, "Yes, I can demonstrate. If you have a knife, I can show you how I heal myself." He looks to Lord Stark for permission, and upon receiving a nod, he reaches into a drawer and pulls out a knife. He hands it to me, and I use the knife to make a long cut on my palm. I concentrate, slowing down my regeneration so that Maester Luwin can clearly see the healing process. I don't want everyone to know just yet how fast I can regenerate. Maester Luwin watches in utter fascination as I demonstrate my powers. He then asks, "How far does the regeneration work? Can you regrow limbs or organs? And do your powers give you knowledge on the anatomy of the human body?" I reply, "I am not sure if I can regenerate limbs or organs, but my powers have granted me knowledge of the anatomy of the human body." Although the names that my powers give me for the different parts and functions are not ones I have ever heard before. Maester Lewin is taken aback by my response, clearly intrigued by the extent of my powers. He continues to ask questions, eager to learn more about my abilities and how they can be used to help others. Maester Lewin asked, "Can you tell me about the different organs in the body?" I go on to explain the different organs in the body and their functions. He asks me various questions about anatomy and I answer with confidence. "What about herbs?" he inquires. I pause for a moment. "I have no knowledge of herbs. I have never needed to use them in my healing." Maester Lewin nods, moving on to more complex questions. These questions may have seemed difficult to someone in this medieval world, but to me they were concepts I learned back in 10th grade. "How do you heal diseases?" he asks. "I have only treated a fever caused by an infected wound that wasn't properly cleaned," I tell him and try to explain the concept of germ theory and bacteria to Maester Lewin. "So let me get this straight," says Maester Lewin. "You're saying that if wounds aren't cleaned with alcohol, these invisible insects can enter and cause fever and death?" "That's right," I nod. "The fever is the body's attempt to kill off the germs. Sometimes it succeeds and the fever goes away, but sometimes it doesn't. Also, the insects aren't invisible, they are just smaller than dust so we can't see them." Maester Lewin is fascinated by this new information and starts writing it down. He begins muttering about how he needs to read more books on anatomy and observe more patients to validate my claims. I am happy to have shared my knowledge and helped Maester Lewin understand the principles of modern medicine. He seems to be the type who genuinely likes to learn, rather than someone who just wants knowledge for the sake of lording it over others. His enthusiasm somewhat made me want to help him more, but I had no idea how to help him confirm the existence of cells and bacteria. I doubted that I could figure out how to create a microscope anytime soon. As Maester Lewin and I discuss the intricacies of modern medicine, a serving girl rushes into the room. She announces that there has been an accident in the courtyard. A young boy has been run over by a wagon. We follow her as she leads us outside. The scene before us is devastating. The boy lies on the ground, his right leg bent at an unnatural angle and his right arm badly mangled. He cries in pain, his voice hoarse from screaming. His mother, who kneels beside him, is crying uncontrollably and a crowd of onlookers stand around helplessly. I follow Lord Stark as he makes his way next to the boy. I look at Lord Stark as if asking for permission and he nods. I get to work. I kneel down next to the boy and touch his hand. I first put him to sleep before beginning the healing process. As I do this, the boy's mother starts screaming hysterically. I reassure her that he is just asleep and that I am going to heal him. Seeing her calm down a bit, I continue. I first stop the bleeding and check what needs to be done. The leg is the easiest, it is only dislocated and has a few bruises, so I just set it back in place and move on to his hand. The boy's hand is a more complicated matter. The most serious issue is that 2 of his fingers are only hanging on by a thread and are otherwise detached from his hand, while the rest of his hand looks like it has gone through a meat grinder. But my powers are pretty broken, so it only takes a few minutes for the boy to look as good as new. I wipe my face and get up to see the entire crowd staring at me in shock. I ignore them and look at the boy's mother, who is in the same state as the others. He's fine now. He should wake up in an hour. He'll probably need to eat enough for 3 people for the next few days though, I say. After everyone snaps out of the trance they are in, a few guards help move the boy into one of the rooms in the castle, and Maester Lewin checks up on the boy. He gives the same verdict I have given and the boy's mother thanks me profusely. After receiving a nod of approval from Maester Lewin, Lord Stark nods, satisfied with my demonstration. He informs me that someone will come to find me later and take me to my new home. I express my gratitude, and as I begin to ponder on my next steps, my stomach growls, reminding me of my hunger. I head towards the forest where I know my companions, Fenrir and Skitter, are lurking. Finding them is easy as I always have a sense of their whereabouts. I see Fenrir eagerly devouring a boar while Skitter munches on some leaves. I decide to join them, and with Skitter's help, we start a fire. As the flame crackles while I cook the meat, I suddenly realize the issue I am faced with. My appetite has increased to the point where I would need to eat 6 meals a day, and I fear that it may cause a problem in Winterfell where food is scarce during the long, harsh winters. That's going to be a problem. I consider my options, and the first idea that comes to mind is the one I had earlier about incorporating photosynthesis into my skin. Although it's not the best solution since it's not very sunny in Winterfell and I can't just lay in a field all day, it's the best temporary fix I can think of. I VE found ways to make it more efficient, and I was told earlier that summer has just started and the seasons in Westeros last a few years. So I won't have to deal with winter problems for a few years and have time to come up with a better solution. For now, this will have to do. I touched the nearest tree and used my powers to analyze it. It took me about an hour to get all the small details, and it was time to start experimenting. I started small and created the plant cells on my palm and directed the necessary inputs for the process to begin. It took a few tries until it started working and I could feel the energy being produced in my cells. It was a lot faster and more efficient than eating food, and that was in this dodgy sunlight. I knew of a few ways to make the process more efficient, like making use of the carbon dioxide directly from the blood in my veins instead of the air. A few hours later, I converted most of the skin cells in my arms and shoulders into photovoltaic cells. I was going to observe them for a few days for any adverse effects before covering my entire body with them. Plus, I don't have a proper way to store all this energy produced yet, so I have to figure that out first if I don't want to waste all that energy. My initially pale skin still looked the same. Unless someone looked very closely, they would find a green tint to it. All of this didn't mean I could just give up on eating, though. I still needed food to get the inputs for photosynthesis to occur. Since I couldn't get them from the ground like trees do, I had to get them from eating normal food. But I only had to eat about as much food as a normal person does to maintain my enhanced body and continue using my powers. Done with my tinkering for the day, I smother the fire and rise to my feet. Just as I'm about to go back into the town, John and Rob burst into the clearing, their expressions full of excitement. "Elle, where have you been?" John calls out. "Father told us to show you your new house of healing." "Oh, I see," I reply, a smile spreading across my face. "Lead the way then." I follow John and Rob as they lead me to my new house. It's an old blacksmith's workshop made of sturdy gray stones, with a sloping roof and a chimney. The building is situated in a prime location, nestled between the castle entrance and the bustling market. I can hear the sounds of people and animals coming from the market and the distant clanging of a blacksmith's hammer. As I look at the workshop, I think to myself, wow, this is some prime real estate. I explore the building with John and Rob. It has 3 rooms, and I decided to convert them into a bedroom, a lab, and a clinic. I know I'll have to use all the coin I got from the bandits to buy furniture for the clinic and the bedroom, but I can worry about the lab later. "Thanks for showing me the place, John and Rob," I say as they prepare to leave. Once they're gone, I start cleaning up. I found a carpenter's workshop nearby and commissioned a bed, a table, and some chairs. I work until nightfall and then call Fenrir and Skitter to my new home. Exhausted from the day's work, I finally go to sleep. Chapter 7. 294 AC. 4 years had passed since the day I woke up in this world, and I had fallen into a routine. I spent my time either tinkering in my lab or treating patients who came to my house, charging only a silver for my services because I felt a little guilty for using them to enhance my powers and conduct experiments. When I wasn't in my lab, I roamed the forest with Fenrir and Skitter, gathering data on various animals. I had also learned a lot about my powers since acquiring them. While they were largely similar to Panacea's powers, there were a few key differences. The first obvious difference was that I could use my powers on myself, a highly beneficial trait. The second big difference that limited my powers greatly was the absence of the Queen Shaper Shard. On one hand, it probably meant there were no entities in this world that would destroy the planet after they obtained enough data from me. On the other hand, because I did not have the shard, which was essentially a planet-sized supercomputer, I had to process all the data my power fed me through my very slow human brain. Even though I had already optimized my nerve conductivity to increase my reaction time and thinking speed, it still wasn't close to shard-level processing, and I wasn't confident enough in doing more changes to my brain at the moment. This significantly hindered my progress, but I knew it should start growing exponentially once I began working on enhancing my brain. I was starting to understand why Panacea avoided working on brains. Half the time it was impossible to correct any mistakes made, and since I had grown to enjoy living here, I no longer saw people as acceptable targets for irreversible experiments. Perhaps I should go north of the wall or to Essos eventually, as cannibals and slavers were very much acceptable targets. This all meant that if I ever wanted to carry out a full-scale genocide, I would have to stick to boring, existing diseases and improve them instead of creating fun, new ones like a zombie virus. While I could theoretically create a zombie virus, the time and effort required would not be worth it. The third difference was that I still couldn't shape plants or trees. I could analyze them like anything else, but attempting to make changes left me exhausted. I got the feeling that there was some sort of prerequisite I needed to achieve before having a crack at that particular wall. The exception to that rule was the weirwood. That annoying piece of shit was basically a blind spot to my powers. I had thought that if I could scan it then maybe I could figure out how to do actual magic, but that wasn't as easy as I expected. Whoever dropped me into this world had tried to nerf me, but was very lazy about it. It did annoy me sometimes, but I couldn't really complain much because my powers were still pretty broken for this world. Nevertheless, I utilized my time effectively and made numerous improvements to myself, rendering me nearly indestructible. That I began by strengthening my bones using carbon lattices, giving me added strength to withstand heavy blows. To protect myself from bleeding out in case of physical trauma, I installed micro hearts and shut-off valves around my arteries. I then fixed a long-standing problem with my eye tissue, ensuring the nerves wouldn't obscure the light-sensitive side of my rods and cones. I increased the redundancy of my anti-cancer genes by adding several more copies of the P53 gene, making it even harder for cancer to survive. Living in a place like Westeros, I adjusted my enzymes and immune system to counteract poison more efficiently. To reduce aging and improve the effectiveness of my immune system. I also stabilized my thyroid and kept stem cell stockpiles to prevent degradation. I enhanced my immune system's ability to store the DNA record of infections and countermeasures, so my body would never forget a disease it had fought off before. And finally, I doubled my DNA checker and repair system to minimize the chance of full DNA severance due to errors. In my pursuit of a ranged attack, I made some progress. I acquired an electric eel to research bioelectricity, but my dream of throwing bolts of lightning was short-lived as the sparks always fizzled out a few inches from my fingers. However, I discovered a much more potent AoE attack, though I hadn't had the chance to test it on people yet. I was still confident it would work fine when I needed it. Additionally, I had started learning swordsmanship with John and Rob under Ser Roderick, but I quickly became too skilled with my enhanced body. I had to stop training because I didn't want to draw attention to my abilities beyond healing. While I suspected that some people might have already realized my enhanced capabilities, thankfully, no one had approached me about it. There had also been one more development, although it was unrelated to my powers. "You're telling me you have figured out how to make Myrish glass?" Lord Stark exclaimed in shock. "Well, I have not seen Myrish glass, so I'm not sure if it's that, but it's a type of glass," I replied with a hint of smugness. It was a humorous episode from my college days that taught me how to make glass. During a phase when my friend and I were trying to outdo each other by creating bongs out of random materials, I ran out of ideas. So I decided to try making a glass bong myself and did extensive research on how to make and shape glass. Although I wasn't successful in creating a bong, I did learn how to make simple glass. He stared at me and the sample I had created in disbelief. It wasn't anything impressive, just a badly made asymmetrical vase made of murky glass. He sighed and accepted the ridiculousness of the situation. "What do you want in exchange for the process?" I started trying to make it because I wanted some glass vials and plates for my lab, but I don't really have the time or patience to do it myself. So I figured you could pass it on to someone who can get better at making it. In exchange, all I require is the equipment for my lab and a reasonable favor at a later date, I said with a shrug, not overly concerned about the financial aspect of the deal. He readily agreed to such a one-sided offer, and I wasn't really in need of money at the moment because my healing was bringing in more money than I needed. 2 years had passed since that incident, and I still had another 4 years until the plot began. During that time, my healing house had gained immense fame, attracting patients from all over the north and even some from the south, which was surprising given the general negative attitude towards magic outside the north. Due to the large number of patients I was seeing daily, I had to hire an assistant. I found one in the form of the daughter of an old couple I had healed on the first day of my clinic. Her name was Freya. She visited me some days and helped out around the clinic sometimes. I agreed to hire her mostly because she was one of the few people in the town who knew how to read and write. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she was pretty and had enchanting gray eyes. Stopping myself from going down that rabbit hole, I look at Fenrir at my side and Skitter flying overhead somewhere. Over the years I had given them some of my upgrades like the photosynthesis and the bioelectricity, and I had given Skitter a camouflage ability with some poisonous pincers too to stick with the assassin theme. Whereas Fenrir was almost as big as a horse and scared the shit out of anybody who was not used to seeing him on a daily basis. He was insanely fast and agile for an animal of his size, but he had also grown lazy. I think it was the photosynthesis upgrade that just makes him lay in sunlight all day, like an overgrown cat. Fenrir was also the reason why no one caused trouble at my clinic. A septon from the south had come and was trying to start some shit by screaming to patients waiting outside my clinic that the seven would strike me down for using my blasphemous magic, and anyone who sought healing from me would burn in hell for eternity. But Fenrir, who had gotten annoyed by the man as much as everyone else outside, just came out from behind the clinic and stared at the septon. The septon froze in shock and fell on his backside and pissed himself. Fenrir then picked him up by the back of his collar, dragged him through the market, and dropped him outside of town. None had tried to cause any more disturbances after that incident. As I walked towards the clinic, I couldn't help but chuckle at that funny memory. I was pleasantly surprised to find that there was no line outside the clinic, which was a rare sight, but then I remembered what day it was. I had previously informed everyone that I wouldn't treat anyone on every 7th day, unless it was an emergency. I couldn't give up my Sundays even if the concept did not exist in this world because I needed some time to rest. Upon entering the clinic, I noticed Freya deep in thought, going over the books that I had written for her. The books were meant to help her handle minor cases or at least keep patients stable until I arrived. The idea of teaching her came to me during the harsh winter, when the winter chill, a deadly viral flu, had affected nearly half of the population. The disease was highly contagious and had a devastating impact, killing 75% of those it infected in just 4 days. After carefully analyzing the virus from the first patient who came to me with the illness, I was able to develop a vaccine for it. Although the disease was easy to cure, the sheer number of patients who came to me with the winter chi was overwhelming. To simplify the process, I took a large amount of biomass and produced a large number of tablets containing the vaccine. I instructed Freya to give the tablets to patients who presented symptoms of the winter chill. Freya often found herself at a loss for words when it came to describing El. He was an odd character, acting more like an eccentric child than a powerful sorcerer. This was not what she had imagined a healer to be like, especially given his youth, which was surprising considering his abilities. Instead of the old and wrinkled stereotype, El was younger than Freya, though not by much. This only added to the sense of oddity that surrounded him. She still remembered the day she first talked to him. She had just come home from working in the kitchens at the keep, when she saw her parents talking excitedly with some of their neighbors. "Mother, what happened?" she asked casually, not expecting much. "Your father almost cut his hand off this morning, so we went to the sorcerer everyone has been talking about to see if he could help," her mother replied in an excited voice, which didn't match what she had just heard. She was filled with worry. "What happened? Is Pa okay? Why did you go to the sorcerer? You could have come to the keep to see Maester Lewin." Yes. He's fine," her mother showed her the hand, which was fully healed and had no scar. "Wow, that's amazing," she said, still in shock and relief. But then she became worried again. "But how much did it cost you?" "That's the strange part," her mother replied. "All he asked for was what maesters typically ask for in exchange for healing normal wounds, and to send anyone else we knew who needed healing his way." "That doesn't make sense," she said, confused. "That's what we thought too. But he seemed genuine when he said it was because we were his first patients," her mother explained. To get to the bottom of things, she decided to visit the healer herself, and had the perfect excuse to do so. She was filled with curiosity, confusion, and a bit of suspicion. She picked up a few loaves of fresh bread from her parents' bakery and made her way to the healing house. Knocked on the door, and entered after hearing a muffled, "Come in." She saw the healer muttering to himself and nervously approached. "Mr. Healer, I wanted to ask you something," she said. He looked at her for a few seconds and responded awkwardly, yes." She thought about how to ask her question. "Mr. Healer," she began. "No need to be so formal," he interrupted. "You can just call me El." "El, my name is Freya. My parents came to you for healing today and I just wanted to know why you didn't ask them for coin in exchange," she asked, feeling curious and confused. Nothing sinister, I assure you. They were my first patients and they answered some of the questions I had. They also agreed to spread the word about the House of Healing," he explained, ending sheepishly and feeling a bit embarrassed. "I see. Then you can have this bread as a thank you," Freya said. "Thank you, it smells delicious," he replied. "Bread, if I could have some pasta, life would be bliss," he muttered. Freya was confused. What's pasta? She asked. He tried to explain, but he started using words she had never heard before. She looked at him as if he had gone crazy. He sighed, having given up, and said, Never mind. Thanks for the bread. After that awkward first encounter, Freya visited any time she could, using the excuse of delivering bread, and helped him around the healing house from time to time. A few moons later, he surprised her with an offer. Do you want to work here? She was ecstatic and agreed immediately, but nervously added, I only know the basics of reading and writing. He smiled reassuringly and said, It's all right, you can learn on the job. She was filled with joy and gratitude, and eagerly accepted the offer. As she sat reading one of the healing books Elle had written, she heard him come in. Anything happen while I was away? He asked. Your lab exploded and a deadly plague has been unleashed into the world, she replied with a straight face. Nothing seems to be on fire and you look awfully fine for someone infected with a deadly plague, he deadpanned, looking around. As if a deadly plague is enough to make me look anything less than perfect, she haughtily replied. As they continued looking at each other with the same expression, she couldn't help but break out in laughter first, unable to keep up the joke anymore. Their inside joke had started when she heard Elle laughing maniacally from his lab while she was reading. Out of curiosity, she entered the lab and was shocked by the sight of shelves filled with dead animals in glass vials and the occasional smoke rising from some of them. Freya was horrified, but Elle quickly explained that they were just ongoing experiments and what they were for, calming her down. From then on, she only entered his lab if it was absolutely necessary. Oh, I almost forgot, she said after discussing some mundane things. Lord Stark asked for you to come see him. It sounded important. Chapter 8. Jon Arryn walked into the small council chambers, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his responsibilities. He was meant to be surrounded by those who would work tirelessly to keep the kingdom running, but all he saw were false faces and self-serving interests. As he took his seat, he scanned the room, his eyes first landing on Stannis Baratheon, the master of ships. He was the only man in the council he could trust, someone who was strict and acted with efficiency while also knowing how to do his job. In contrast, Renly Baratheon, Stannis's younger brother and the master of law, was a disappointment. He barely fulfilled his duties and spent most of his time frolicking with the Tyrells, being easily manipulated. Despite Jon's efforts to bring this to King Robert's attention, the king seemed to pay it no mind. Next, his gaze fell upon Peter Baelish, the master of coin. Jon knew that Peter acted only in his own interests, lining his pockets with gold at every opportunity, but he was someone who he had appointed to the council after seeing his work in Gulltown, so he at least knew how to do his job. Then there was Varys, the enigmatic master of whispers. He was a skilled information gatherer, but no one knew what secrets he kept or where his loyalties lay. Every time Jon attempted to probe further, Varys would simply reply with a cryptic answer about his loyalty to the realm. Finally, Jon's gaze settled on Pycelle, the Grand Maester. Despite the pressing issue plaguing the city, he seemed uncaring, continuing to act as if he were a weak old man, instead of dealing with the matter with the best of his abilities. He was sure that the Grand Maester was not going to have a good time today. As Jon sat there, surrounded by the members of the council, he couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment in the state of the kingdom and those who were meant to lead it. Seeing him sit down, Baelish was the first to start talking, but before he could, the door to the chamber was thrown open violently and Robert entered with a cup of wine in his hand. Followed by Ser Selmy, Jon saw that everyone was surprised to see the king. He would have been surprised too if not for the fact that he had asked Robert to attend in the first place. The king had made it no secret that he did not like attending the copper counting meetings, as he put it. However, the issue at hand was dire, so Jon was able to convince his former ward to attend. As the king entered, the members of the council rose to their feet in unison, bowing their heads in respect. Your Grace, they said in unison. Bah, sit down all of you, the king of the Seven Kingdoms grumbled dismissively, taking his seat. So I'm here. I'm assuming it's about the plague going on in my city? Pycelle, what news do you have about the issue? Robert asked, already annoyed. Pycelle shifted nervously in his seat, stuttering as he began to speak. The small folk in the capital are being devastated by the winter chill, Your Grace, and even some of the servants in the Red Keep have fallen ill. Jon sighed, already aware of the extent of the epidemic. Have the maesters at the Citadel discovered any way to slow its spread? We are doing everything in our power, Lord Hand, but this is a very old disease. it first appeared on the Three Sisters in late 132 AC and quickly spread through the major ports of the East Coast, including Gulltown, Maidenpool, and Duskendale. It even reached Bravos. In King's Landing, it first struck the riverside workers and then spread throughout the city. Despite being less potent as it traveled south, it resurfaced in Barrowton in the north in the second half of the year. However, unlike last time when it appeared in the middle of winter, this time, because it began its spread after winter ended, we had assumed that it would not spread very fast, Pycelle replied with a shrug. So you were wrong. Now what are you going to do about it? Robert asks, getting more annoyed. We just need to weather the storm, Your Grace, Pycelle says, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world and they were the fools to even ask such a question. All I'm hearing from you, Pycelle, is that you are fucking useless, so we should do nothing, Robert summarized the situation in a crude but accurate way. And what the Grand Maester seems to be conveniently forgetting is that the winter chill is known to be deathly, killing 3 out of every 4 people who were stricken, John added, and it's estimated to have killed almost 1/5 of the population of King's Landing the last time it struck. Pycelle sputters, trying to come up with excuses. Varys takes the opportunity to chime in. I may have some news regarding the issue, Lord Hand. John gestures to him to continue. I'm sure you all have heard the rumors of the White Mage in Winterfell who can heal all wounds with a touch. Well, this time he seems to have created a cure for the winter chill. Pycelle finally seemed to have found his voice again. Your Grace, he interjected, his voice filled with disbelief. You cannot take such rumors seriously. This White Mage is nothing but a fraudulent charlatan, exploiting the ignorance of the northern smallfolk to rob them of their coin. He had begun to notice that the Grand Maester would jump on every opportunity he could get to paint the mage in a bad light. It probably had something to do with the fact that all maesters hated magic, but this time he had timed it badly, especially after the incompetence he had just shown, so he decides to finally shut him up. That is unlikely, Grand Maester. I got a raven from Ned 2 days ago about the White Mage. He's a boy of 10 and 8 name days, and he was found on his way back from the Greyjoy Rebellion. Ned assures me that the boy is capable of all the things the rumors say. I verified the fact myself a few moons ago after I first heard about him. I sent one of my knights who had lost 2 fingers in battle long ago to seek healing from the White Mage. He came back with all 5 fingers. Ned had also sent me some of the pills made by the mage. I gave them to one of my maids who was dying to the chill, and today she is back to resuming her duties. As for your accusations regarding the boy robbing people of their money, he only charges a silver for his healing no matter who asks for it. The only reason he made those pills was because he was getting annoyed by the amount of people who were coming to him with the winter chill. Instead of healing them one by one, he made the pills to speed up the process, he stated, fixing the Grand Maester with a glare that shut the old man up. Since his arrival in Winterfell, the White Mage has become beloved by the people of the north and even some from the south. He has created a cure for a disease that the Citadel has not been able to cure in a century, and the best advice they could give was, let whoever is going to die die. Hopefully we don't die with them. With that final barb he ends his case. Apart from the healing that the White Mage provided accompanied by the influx in population, the North of all places had figured out how to make glass that was on par with anything they could currently purchase from Myr. Ned hadn't told him how he got his hands on the process, but he figured it had something to do with the mage based on the timing. Glassmaking may seem inconsequential to many in the warmer kingdoms who thought glass was just a luxury item, but for the people of the North it was a major breakthrough. With the ability to produce their own glass, they could now create glass gardens at a faster and cheaper rate to help them produce food even during the harshest of winters. While he was happy with Ned's good fortune, he was also a little annoyed by the problems it was causing him. The Tyrells, who had been profiting greatly from selling their excess grain to the desperate people of the North, now found themselves with a shortage of buyers. Although he felt a slight satisfaction at their misfortune, he knew that he would soon have to deal with their complaints and demands. The thought of it was not a pleasant one, and it was a headache he was not eager to face. Coming back from his musings, he sees that Robert has come to a decision reading the matter. The bloody mage seems to know what he's doing. He can't be worse than Pycelle at least, Robert grumbled, waving his hand dismissively in Pycelle's direction, ignoring his complaints. Send a raven north and summon this mage to King's Landing. Hopefully he'll be able to reach the city and deal with the outbreak before half the city is dead. Ned sat in his solar, staring at the letter from King's Landing. The missive brought a mixture of emotions to the surface. On one hand, he felt happy that he could help his friend the king, even if it was indirect, and the people of King's Landing. On the other hand, he was filled with apprehension at how Elle would receive the news. If he agreed to travel to King's Landing, Winterfell would be without him for several moons, and the people would not be pleased with that. Unknowingly, everyone had come to rely on him, as the line at his clinic grew longer every day, with people from all over the continent seeking his help. The entire population of Winterfell had increased by quite a margin, even in the winter. While he knew that some of them were spies sent by other lords, he couldn't do anything about them unless they started trouble, but no one really wanted to start trouble after they saw the massive direwolf lazing about in front of the healing house. The people of Winterfell had come to adore Elle for his work. Even Cat, who always criticized everything he did, had stopped complaining after Bran fell ill with a fever. Convincing Cat to let Elle treat their son had been a battle in itself. On the first day, the battle was lost, but as a mother, Cat could not bear to see her child suffer, especially when her prayers to her gods went unanswered. The next day, before he could even attempt to convince her, she took the initiative and went to the healing house herself to ask Elle politely and desperately to heal her son. One day later, Bran was running around the keep again, trying to climb its walls. That incident had caused some problems with the Septa, who had tried to convince Cat that their son was now cursed and had to be purified, else he would burn in the seven hells. But Cat just straight up threatened to kick her out of Winterfell if she didn't shut up. Ned was lost in thought at that entertaining memory. A knock at the door interrupted his musings. Chapter 9. After making sure that nothing in my lab was actually on fire, I made my way to the keep and knocked on Lord Stark's solar. "Come in," he called out. Did I enter and see the Warden of the North go through the ever-present stack of paperwork. "You called Lord Stark?" I asked, curious. It was very rare that he called me to the keep unless it was an emergency. "The king has summoned you to King's Landing," he says, getting straight to the point. "What, why?" I ask in confusion. I had gotten quite famous in the last 2 years, but I didn't think I had done anything to warrant the attention of the stuck-up nobles in the capital so suddenly. There has been an outbreak of the winter chill in the capital. Almost a fourth of the small folk are infected, along with quite a few of the residents of the Red Keep, he explains. I blink in surprise. I hadn't seen that coming. I hadn't heard of anything like this happening in the story, so I must have messed up the plot already without I see what happened, or at least a vague idea of what happened. There was probably a patient zero somewhere who has now certainly passed away. In a world where I did not exist, he would have died in the place where he first contracted the disease, without spreading it. However, because I do exist, he attempted to travel to Winterfell to seek healing from the magic healer, possibly with a group of people. He died on the journey, but not before spreading the disease to others. And due to the increased traffic from merchants to Winterfell, which was also a result of my existence, the disease rapidly spread to all major cities. I'm either correct or being overly narcissistic, but whatever, no point in trying to figure out how it happened, I see. But why do I have to go in person? Can't I just send them a supply of the medicine I have made? I ask, still feeling a bit bewildered. He sighs. That would have been the case if you weren't so well known throughout the realm already. My guess is that the lords in King's Landing want to get a measure of you and see if they can use you in their games. And the king probably feels that the problem would be solved the fastest if you were there in person. Lord Stark explains with a frown, clearly unhappy with the situation. I shrug. Makes sense, I guess. When do I have to leave? I asked, keeping my voice steady on the outside, but inside I felt a mix of annoyance and excitement. Although I was irritated about being summoned by the king, I had been contemplating traveling for a while. I was growing a bit bored of staying in Winterfell. Now I finally had the perfect excuse to go on a journey. I will have a group of soldiers ready to escort you by tonight. You should reach the capital in a few nights, Lord Stark replied. Lord Stark, if time is of the essence, it would be best if I leave alone with Fenrir. You have seen how fast he is compared to horses, and he's probably the only escort I need. The soldiers would only slow us down, no offense, my lord, I suggested. That I hardly needed an escort. I was pretty much invulnerable, if you don't count magic shenanigans, and I wouldn't have to do much fighting anyways if I had Fenrir with me. I was extremely excited about the trip, but I wouldn't be able to do things freely if I had to babysit a group of soldiers. I also had no intention of spending an entire month just traveling. I could even make some detours on the way back, just to see the sights and mess with some infamous characters. Are you sure you will be fine all alone in the capital? It is not a place where even I would be comfortable being alone, Lord Stark said, looking at me with a concerned expression. It's all right, my lord. I'm smarter and stronger than I look, and if things go pear-shaped, it will be easier for me to escape if I only have Fenrir with me instead of a group of soldiers, I replied, trying to reassure him. He contemplated my reasoning for a few moments and hesitantly agreed. I took my leave and walked back to the clinic to prepare for my journey. As I was leaving the keep, I saw Arya running down the hallway. Her eyes light up when she sees me. She runs past me without a word and hides in a room to my right. I was confused by her behavior until I saw Rob come into the hallway from the same direction, looking annoyed. Have you seen Arya? She ran away from her lessons and they sent me to track her down, Rob said. I have no idea, Rob. I just came from having a talk with your father in his solar, I say with a smirk, tilting my head towards the room Arya was hiding in. Rob gets the message and plays along while slowly moving towards the room and catches her before she could run away. Arya gave me a look of betrayal. Traitor, she said. You wound me, little wolf. I clearly tried very hard to deceive your brother, I replied, trying to sound fake and sincere at the same time. She just pouts at me until Rob asks, What brings you to visit father? You normally don't come out of your clinic unless it's for training or hunting. I have to go to the capital, I replied nonchalantly. There's been an outbreak and I've been summoned to help. Arya's eyes widened in shock. You're leaving? When? Tonight, I answered. But don't worry, I won't be gone for long. I'll be back in 2 moons at the latest. Despite my attempts to reassure them, it took a few more promises and bribes before they were satisfied and I was allowed to leave. When I arrived at the clinic, I had a similar conversation with Freya. It took some time to calm her and assure her that I would be fine and would return soon. I explained to her that she couldn't come with me, as she was the only one who knew how to run the clinic. After I finally got her to calm down, I told her I had to leave tonight, which caused another argument about how she was supposed to help me get ready for the capital. I got confused. I didn't really need anything other than food and water for the journey. She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, You're going to go into King's Landing in the same clothes you are wearing right now? Yes. She gave me a look that people give to kids when they say something particularly dumb. You're not going to meet the king and his court dressed like someone who lives in a forest. You are the white mage, you need to dress the part. White mage? I asked, incredulous. She lets out a weary sigh. It's what people in the south call you. My eyebrows furrowed. Since when? And I thought they called me a heretic or demon worshipper or something equally unimaginative. She rolls her eyes. You rarely pay attention, and the only ones that call you that are the Septons. The rest of the southerners that come here to get healed by you call you the white mage. As Freya called me by the nickname I didn't even know I had, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. That name is so plain and doesn't make sense. I never wear white, it's a nightmare to keep clean. I'd much rather be called the Black Mage, I grumbled. Freya appeared exasperated with my failure to grasp the importance of my name and appearance. My confused and crestfallen expression only seemed to annoy her further. I'll be back, she said, before leaving the clinic to gather the things she deemed necessary for my journey to the capital. So I grumbled to myself and headed to my laboratory to take a look at some of my experiments, since I wouldn't be there for a while. I also made the decision to destroy some of the dangerous experiments to prevent any accidents from occurring in my absence. Then I went to pack some food for the journey. As I entered my bedroom, I was greeted by the sight of Skitter perched on my windowsill. Hey girl, I said, I'm going to have to leave you behind this time. I need someone to protect Freya and the clinic in case anyone tries their luck when Fenrir and I are gone. Skitter dipped her head once in agreement, and I took a moment to pet her before she disappeared off to who knows where. While having an invisible assassin in the Red Keep might sound like a good idea, I didn't plan to kill the annoying characters before the plot started. That would be too easy and life would get boring too soon. Instead, it would be better to mess with people and watch their reactions. It took a few hours to gather everything I needed for my trip, but finally I was ready. Just as I was packing my last item, Freya entered the room, holding a white trench coat. Wow, that looks nice, I said, trying to make a joke. It would look even better if it was black though. Freya looks displeased with my comment. Just take it, okay? She says, her voice cold. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way, I quickly apologize, trying to make amends. It's just that I was surprised you managed to get it so quickly. I've been working on it for a while, she says, her tone softening. You made this? I ask, impressed. Of course, why do you look so surprised? She says, her tone now sounding a bit offended. I didn't know you could sew, I say, surprised. She looked insulted by my comment, so I didn't say anything more on the topic. Thank you for the coat, Freya. I truly don't know what I would do without your help, I say, expressing my gratitude and appreciation for her. She smiles warmly in response. You're welcome. So, when do you plan on leaving? She asks, looking at me expectantly. I've got everything packed and ready to go, I answer, feeling a mix of excitement and sadness. I just need to speak with Lord Stark before departing. As I put on my new coat, I couldn't help but admire it, despite white not being my preferred color. Freya takes my old coat and mentions something about burning it. I wisely decide not to voice any objections. Together with Fenrir we set off towards the keep to inform Lord Stark of my upcoming journey. Upon arriving in the courtyard, I was surprised to see the entire Stark family waiting for me. You're traveling light, I see, Lord Stark comments, observing my modest satchel. I don't really need much, I explain. I'm just bringing some medicine for the winter chill. It's easier to make it in the capital than to bring it all the way here and then across the continent. Lord Stark nods and hands me 2 scrolls, each bearing the emblem of a direwolf. The first will ensure that you reach the capital without any interference from lords who might try to stop you, he explains, his voice serious. The second is a message for the king. I thank Lord Stark and say my goodbyes to everyone. I nod at Lady Stark. While she had stopped trying to condemn everything I did after I healed Bran, we still weren't really on friendly terms. You could say that I exchanged farewells with the children, promising to bring back gifts from the capital day as I turned to bid farewell to Freya. I am at a loss for words. But to my surprise, she leans in and gives me a kiss. A warmth spreads through me and I can't help but smile. I'll be back soon, I promise her as I gaze into her eyes. I climb on top of Fenrir, pat him on the side. Let's go, my friend. Adventure awaits. He sets off like the wind, excited for our journey ahead. Chapter 10. It had been 3 days since I left Winterfell, and Fenrir had been blitzing past landmarks at an incredible pace. I stopped briefly near the twins, at the entrance of the Riverlands, to contemplate whether I had the patience to deal with the Frey's version of nonsense, or whether I should swim the river instead. In the end, I decided to swim the river and maybe mess with them on the way back. At the pace I was going, I knew I would make it to King's Landing in about 4 days. As I looked at the landscape blurring past me, I began to plan what I could do when I arrived at the capital. I knew enough information to start a war within 5 minutes of meeting the king, but I decided to hold on to that for now as it would be too straightforward and suspicious on my part. Instead, I needed to focus on the main issue I was summoned for. I could just make the pills and hand them over to be distributed, but I was almost 100% sure that most of the pills I gave out would end up missing or stolen to be later sold to the highest bidder. I didn't really care much about money after I came to the New World, but I wasn't going to let someone exploit me so easily. This was going to be my debut in King's Landing, so I would have to do something big and flashy that would make the White Mage known across all of Westeros. A grin spread across my face as a plan began to form in my head. 4 days later, I could see King's Landing in the distance, and I told Fenrir to slow down as the smell hit us both. Oh boy, if this is how strong the smell of shit is this far away, Fenrir might just die when we make it to the city, I thought as I looked at Fenrir trying to bury his nose in the ground. Taking pity on my friend, I just touched his fur and dampened his sense of smell to a huge margin, and I did the same to myself. He looked a lot better now, but was still uncomfortable at having one of his main senses dulled. But there wasn't much I could do at the moment, and it would only be for a few days if everything goes according to my plan. As I approached the gate, I knew I must have been quite the sight, my white coat contrasting quite well with Fenrir's black fur. I would have to remember to get something nice for Freya as a proper thank you before I returned. I went past the long line of people waiting to get inside the capital and approached the guards. One of the braver ones finally spoke up. Halt, state your business in the capital, he said. I smiled at him. The king has summoned me, and handed him the scroll that Lord Stark had given me. He took the scroll with shaky hands and read it. His pale face paled even more as he apologized for the inconvenience. Sir Healer, we weren't expecting you for another night. Considering the situation, I decided to come post-haste, and my mount is pretty fast, I said, patting Fenrir. Although I was a bit confused about being addressed as a Sir, I didn't dwell on it too much. Of course, Sir Healer, one moment, he said, returning the scroll to me and yelling at the other guards to open the gate. I nodded at the guard and moved past the gate, aware of all the eyes on me. I had been quite a shy kid in my previous life, but I seemed to be turning into quite an attention whore in this life. Fenrir walked slowly down the road, giving me ample time to take in the scenery around me. At first glance it looked like one would expect, but it only took a second glance to see the poverty and hopelessness of the people living here, on top of the foul odor that I could still smell. Even after dampening my senses, I went through what looked like the marketplace to look at the wares and notice something interesting. I smirked, as I had just found the perfect excuse to not make the pills, just as I had expected. Now, if the king or the members of the small council asked me to mass-produce or asked me to anyway, I had a valid reason to deny them. As I arrived at the Red Keep, I couldn't help but be awed by its grandeur. Made of a stunning pale red stone, it commanded a majestic presence, overlooking the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. The keep boasted 7 colossal drum towers, each adorned with iron ramparts, serving as a testament to the might and power of the kingdom's rulers. Maybe I should become the king just to be able to call this castle mine. Nah, the rest of the city is shit and it'll be too much work to take over and fix everything. I'd rather just make sure to subtly let everyone know not to fuck with me, I thought to myself. As I reached the stables, I realized that someone from the gate must have alerted everyone important of my arrival, because I wasn't stopped by a single guard and no one tried to stop me from taking Fenrir, which was unexpected. I rolled with it and kept going. I dismounted from Fenrir as I didn't want to be too rude. I reached the entrance of the castle with Fenrir, and a servant greeted me nervously, taking sideways glances at Fenrir, but didn't say anything. Instead, he wordlessly gestured for me to follow him. We reached what I could only assume was the throne room given the sheer size of the room and the herald announcing their arrival. Your Grace King Robert Baratheon of House Baratheon, Her Grace Queen Cersei of House Lannister. Announcing the arrival of El, the White Mage of Winterfell. As I stepped into the throne room of the Red Keep, a hush fell over the people present, and they quickly scurried to the sides, creating a path. While it would have been flattering to believe that their actions were due to my reputation and imposing presence, the reality was that everyone was likely awed by Fenrir's imposing size and menacing aura. As I stepped foot into the throne room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The room was enormous, perhaps even large enough to fit the entirety of the Great Hall of Winterfell within, and still have room to spare. Tall, vaulted ceilings. Glass windows with intricate works of art decorating their surfaces. Pillars with ornate carvings embellished with gold and jewels. The room was like a work of art, with one notable exception. The monstrosity that was the Iron Throne perched upon the dais at the far end of the hall. I remembered from the story that after he'd conquered the 7 kingdoms, King Aegon I had taken the swords of over 1,000 men from his fallen adversaries and used them, along with the fire from his dragon, to forge the Iron Throne. The throne was designed purposefully to be uncomfortable, and that many kings had cut themselves on the throne. The unsymmetrical monstrosity in front of me wasn't the pathetic imitation from the show, it was the real deal, and words could not describe how glorious it looked, and I could somewhat understand why so many people died for a chance to sit on it. Standing in front of the throne, separating it from the rest of the crowd, were 7 men wearing gold-tinted armor with heavy white cloaks. Around their shoulders, the King's Guard. The best knights of the realm. Just behind the King's Guard were a handful of others that I was almost sure were the members of the small council. There was only a single woman standing amongst them, and she was standing closest to the throne of the group. Cersei Lannister, I thought as I walked closer to the throne. Looking at her now, she somehow looked more beautiful than I had expected. However, I knew that beneath that beauty was a cold, heartless bitch who would do anything to keep her power. I also remembered a wise man once saying to never stick your dick in crazy. Standing on the opposite side of the queen was an old man who was wearing a golden hand pin on his chest. The hand of the king, I thought. Lord Jon Arryn. I don't remember his face from the shows, probably because he died before episode 1. The man was not what I'd expected. He was old, very old. And going by the look in his eye, extremely tired. The only other person standing beside the throne that caught my attention was the extremely old man that stood hunched over with more chains wrapped around his neck and shoulders than I had ever seen before. The Grand Maester. Though it was odd. The man was hunched over and he was shaking, but I could sense that he was angry, probably because I was called here for doing his job better than him by using magic. And lastly, sitting atop the Iron Throne was the king, Robert Baratheon, first of his name. He looked as fat as expected and not very impressive. The White Mage of Winterfell, the king bellowed from the throne. Your Grace, I said, bowing. It would be annoying if people started yelling at my lack of respect so soon after my arrival. Rise, the king commanded. I straightened up, and the king shifted his gaze from me to Fenrir, who was now looking around curiously at all the new faces that paled whenever his eyes passed over them. A fucking direwolf, bigger than a horse too, the king stated curiously. He then became serious. You sure it won't just start ripping people's throats out? Yes, Your Grace, I replied. He listens to me and won't attack anyone unless provoked. The king's expression grew contemplative. Very well, you can keep him close, but the moment he attempts to remove anyone's limbs I'll have him put to the sword. Did I do my best to not laugh at the threat and just reply, sounds fair, Your Grace, with a nod. Well then, moving on to important matters, healer, the king began, I believe Ned has told you the gist of the situation. Do you think you can use your magic to cure 100,000 people of the winter chill? I knew it was time to put on a performance, so I confidently replied, Definitely, Your Grace. I have thought of a few ways to deal with the epidemic on my journey here. Depending on which method you allow me to use, I can tell you how long it will take to do so. Go on, the king prompted. Well, the first method is quite simple, Your Grace, I began. It just involves me going from one person to another and healing them individually. The only issue is, based on the number of people, it will take around 2 moons. The king's face showed dissatisfaction. Too long, I'm sure you have ways to do it faster. Of course, Your Grace, I quickly responded. The second one is that I make the pills that you have seen I made in Winterfell. While I can make enough pills by tonight, I see some troubles arising with this method. What troubles? It worked in Winterfell. It should work here too, the king asked. I had the same thought, Your Grace, I said, sounding a little disappointed. But after I reached King's Landing, I saw quite a number of people in the market selling what they swore were pills made by the White Mage for 8 silvers. Now, I am pretty sure that Lord Stark or I haven't sent anyone enough pills to be sold on the market, and they were of the wrong size and color. So if we go through with this method, I am pretty sure most of what I make will end up getting lost or stolen and sold to the highest bidder, and the city will still be sick and dying. The king looked very angry, his face darkening with rage. He turned to Varys. Is what he said true? Sadly, yes, Your Grace, Varys replied, his voice filled with regret. Ever since news of the White Mage's pills reached the capital, many swindlers have been using such a ruse to trick the people. The king slammed his fist on the throne and yelled, Renly, I want them found and thrown in the sea. LLS by the end of the day. Renly stammered in agreement, and I continued. I have one more option, Your Grace. I can make the medicine in a form where breathing it in would be enough to heal a person. But to make sure it works quickly and properly, I would need a pyre set up in the middle of the city. I threw in the bait and waited for the fish to bite, and I didn't have to wait long. He's going to sacrifice the small folk in the pyre to practice his vile magic, Your Grace, the Grand Maester shouted, his voice filled with fear and anger. Keep your mouth shut, Pycelle, the king said, glaring at the oldest man in the room with a look that made me realize that, despite his appearance, there was still quite a bit of strength left in King Robert. I have called him here to help the city with a duty which you have failed to perform. And unlike you, I seriously doubt he is stupid enough to ask me to allow him to make human sacrifices in my kingdom. After shutting the Grand Maester up, he shifted his attention back to me and gestured for me to continue. Did I smirk at Pycelle and continued, I won't really need any human sacrifice, Your Grace. It's just a simple pyre and any amount of animal meat you can spare. It doesn't really have to be the edible parts too. Bones work as well. With this, I can guarantee that in 2 days there will not be a single soul in King's Landing suffering from the winter chill. Preposterous. Such medicine does not exist. Grand Maester Pycelle exclaimed in disbelief. Pycelle? The king yelled and glared at the maester. I have already warned you once, the next time I will just cave your face in. Maybe that will finally shut you up. The fury on his face was so evident that the Grand Maester started trembling as if his legs were about to give out. I hope you are not lying to me, healer, the king said after turning to me, his voice filled with suspicion. I have no reason to lie, Your Grace, I reassured him. And even if I am, you only need 2 days to confirm my words, I added. I see, Ned seems to trust you, so I'll do the same for now. When can you start? The king asked. It'll take me a few hours to get everything ready, I replied. And if the pyre is set up by then, we can get started tonight, I added, my tone confident. Very well then, the king said, nodding his head. Someone show him to a room where he can work and get the bloody pyre set up, he commanded. Chapter 11. After my declaration in the throne room, a servant showed me to one of the unused kitchens where someone had already brought in all the animal meat I needed to get myself started. The plan I had uttered in front of everyone in the throne room was utter bullshit. I couldn't help but giggle to myself at the absurdity of setting shit on fire to spread the medicine in the air. I haven't lied so much in a long time. Even if I could make an aerosol version of the cure, the amount I would need to cure an entire city without it being blown away in the wind was not something that was comprehensible. So why did I lie? You may ask. Well, my best plan to get rid of the chill was very efficient but not very grandiose. So I had to improvise and split it into two parts. The real plan to cure the disease was by using rats. I would make a lot of rats using the biomass I now had access to and use them to spread the cure just like they normally spread diseases. Except my rats would be designed to just spread the cure as much as possible instead of doing it by accident. I also made them able to spread the cure to existing rats in the city. But the cure to the winter chill was only one of the two things I was going to spread using the rats. You see, over the span of my journey, I was thinking of the best way to leave an impact on King's Landing, and the most obvious answer that came up was that I had to make the city stop smelling like shit. Now, how would I go about doing that? Very simple. I created a bacteria that literally eats shit and multiplies. Now, while this was actually very simple to make, it was very hard to later put a lot of kill switches on it, in case they somehow end up eating the planet. So I had to balance their lifespans with their multiplication rate and how long they could last without eating shit. I also made sure that they could not survive in an environment close to the normal body temperature of humans. After I was sure I wasn't unleashing the end of the world, I let my army of rats run free and do their jobs. Now the other side of my plan. The pyre, I hadn't really given it much thought. I just wanted to make something that looked like a magic ritual. I was going to make a flammable mixture of biomass, containing a lot of magnesium and aluminum, which would burn very hot and slow, and have an ethereal white flame to really just stay in theme of the white mage. I take the remaining biomass and convert it according to my needs and transfer it into a container. I had enough of it to burn for about 2 days. I looked outside the window and saw that it was almost time. Lord Stannis of all people comes in to inform me that the pyre was ready. I nod and tell him to lead the way while I carry the container. We make our way outside the Red Keep in silence, and Fenrir rejoins me. He had gone off somewhere after he got tired of watching me an hour into my prep. Hopefully, he had stayed out of trouble. We ended up in the marketplace I had passed through when I got here. Although there was a larger crowd gathered along with what looked like the entire court that I had seen earlier, I noticed the king and queen standing near the huge pyre. Damn, I didn't expect the queen to be here. She definitely thinks all this is beneath her. Well, maybe everyone is just curious to see a magic ritual, I guess. That's when the king notices me. Healer, I see you made it. Are you done with your preparations? I am, your grace, I replied, trying my best to hide the excitement in my voice. Very good, the king said. When can you begin? We can begin right away, I responded. With purposeful strides, I made my way towards the unlit pyre and dumped all the fuel I had made. Looking up to the vast expanse of the night sky, I paused for a moment, as if offering a silent prayer to the powers that be, though truthfully, it was more for my own amusement than anything else. As the sound of the gathered crowd faded into the background, I channeled the bioelectricity within me, illuminating my hand with a bright and crackling energy. With a steady hand I made contact with the waiting fuel below, and in an instant, an otherworldly white flame erupted with a sudden burst of intense heat and light. The gathered spectators gasped in awe as the flames rose higher and higher, their faces bathed in the ethereal glow of the blaze. A sense of satisfaction swelled within me as I watched everything unfold before my eyes, my inner smirk hidden behind a facade of calm composure. We all watch the beautiful flame for a few minutes before the king asks, "What now, healer?" "Now we wait, your grace. You should be able to see signs of it working by tomorrow, and it should have done its work by the day after," I say confidently as I can already sense my rats getting to work. After all that, everyone went their separate ways. I was shown to one of the guest rooms. I fell asleep with a smile as I could already sense the smell decreasing by a small margin. The next morning I woke up and went out onto the balcony and took a deep breath. It smelled immensely better than what I had to deal with yesterday. The bacteria were doing quite a fast job of getting rid of the shit, and the wind from the bay was doing a good job of blowing away the existing smell. And with most of the shit gone, there was no more foul smell to keep replacing it. One of the rats comes into my room, I pick it up, and look through the information it has for me. They had done a good job, the cure had been spread to about 80% of the sick and they were all on their way to get better. And because most of the rats traveled through the sewers that were filled with shit, the bacteria had thrived and exploded in numbers. I probably have to keep an eye on the little buggers. Exponential growth is good and all but can get out of hand very fast. But I wasn't very worried. I had created quite a few kill switches on them. The main one was I just had to release a command and they would all start killing each other instead of multiplying. Well, I could worry about that later. I had my fill of sunlight on the balcony and now I just needed something to eat before I got to see everyone's reactions. It had been odd that no one other than the king had spoken to me yesterday. Then I realized that a lot of them were still skeptical of me and were waiting for me to succeed or fail to deliver before trying to play their games accordingly. So today will probably be filled with me talking to all the important players in the capital. I couldn't help but feel a sense of amusement at the thought of all the political maneuvering that would happen as a result of my actions. In the chamber of the small council, sitting in a high-back chair with his head propped up by his hand was King Robert. The king was surprisingly sober for once as he stared down at the rest of the people in attendance. Barristan Selmy stood silently at the king's back, while the remaining council members John Aaron, Grand Maester Pycelle, Peter Baelish, and Renly Baratheon listened intently as Stannis Baratheon took up a report and began to speak. I have received confirmation from all the houses that have been collecting the sick in an effort to curb the spread of the disease, Stannis announced, his tone grave but steady. As the healer claimed, most of those afflicted have made significant strides towards recovery, or have already made a full recovery since yesterday. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air and for a moment, no one dared to break the somber silence that had descended upon the council chamber. The heavy silence in the council chamber did not last for long, as King Robert's chuckles soon filled the room. "Fucking hells," Robert laughed and looked over at Pycelle. "You got anything to add to that report, Pycelle?" The Grand Maester kept sputtering excuses. "Surely it's just a coincidence, Your Grace. 100,000 people getting better the day after the healer does his ritual. I thought you were more learned than that, Pycelle," Stannis says in a dry tone, his expression showing a mix of frustration and disbelief. Lord Aaron sat up straighter. "Ignoring the Grand Master's incompetence, we have another matter to discuss, a matter you all should have noticed by now. Yes, the fact that my city does not smell like shit anymore," Robert said, looking around the room. Most of them had already noticed the matter and didn't know how to bring it up or were just noticing the matter. "It must have been the healer's doing, it's the only thing that makes sense," Lord Aaron said, looking around the room as the others nodded in agreement. "What has he been doing this morning?" Robert asked, looking towards Varys for an answer. "He went to the pyre after breaking his fast, Your Grace," Varys informed the king. "He is back in his quarters now." "Well, summon him here then," Robert ordered, his tone firm and commanding. Everyone in the room could sense the king's excitement and anticipation to hear what the healer had to say about the recent developments. I made my way to the small council chamber. I had hoped this discussion would have taken place in the throne room, but we can't have our way all the time. As I pushed open the doors, I immediately felt the weight of the council's gaze upon me, each member showing a different emotion: admiration, scrutiny, and fear. Their expressions only fueled my sense of satisfaction and control. As I made my way towards the king with confident strides, I approached the king and gave him a small bow. "Your Grace," I said, "you summoned me?" Robert Baratheon looked at me with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "Yes, healer, I did. I have received reports of people suffering from the winter chill getting better. You have my thanks for that, but all of us have also noticed that the city does not smell like shit anymore. Was that your doing as well?" I couldn't help but smirk at the king's question. "Of course, Your Grace. I had heard of that particular problem before I had reached King's Landing, but only after I set foot inside the capital did I see the extent of it. It would have also led to more diseases later down the line. It was an easy problem to solve for me. I just had to add a few more ingredients to the pyre so that it accomplished both the tasks," I said confidently, with a hint of pride in my voice. The council members looked at me with wonder, unsure of how to react to my revelation. "This is incredible," Robert exclaimed, his eyes wide with amazement. "You have done something that we have been struggling to do for years. You have my thanks, healer," No thanks are needed, Your Grace, I replied, bowing my head humbly. I am just doing my job. The king's expression softened and he let out a small chuckle. Well, I'll be damned, he exclaimed. I must admit, I wasn't entirely convinced of your honesty from the start. But you have certainly proven me wrong, and I shall be sure to reward you for your diligent efforts. Since you have finished the task you were called for, what other plans do you have in the capital? The king asked. I plan on staying until the job is done completely, Your Grace, I replied. The pyre will burn for one more day, and I shall have to go heal anyone still sick after that, as they might have some other ailment along with the chill. I also offer my services to anyone in the Red Keep if they have a need for healing, I added. The meeting ended with the king expressing his gratitude again and promising to discuss my reward later. Once I got back to my room, I just sat on the balcony to enjoy the beautiful view. Chapter 12. As I sat on the balcony, basking in the warm sun and feeling the gentle breeze on my face, my mind wandered to something I had been thinking of ever since I left Winterfell. I rose from my comfortable perch and set off with a determined step. One of my rats had already found what I was looking for, and I knew exactly where to go. As I made my way through the winding corridors of the keep, I couldn't help but feel as though I was being watched. A quick glance over my shoulder confirmed my suspicions. A few servants were discreetly following me, their eyes trained on my every move. Not wanting to draw any attention to myself, I altered my course and began to wander aimlessly, occasionally stopping to ask for directions or feigning interest in some minor detail of the castle's architecture. It wasn't long before I reached the room I had been seeking. I approached it with caution, taking care to make it seem as though I had stumbled upon it by chance. My heart raced as I stood before the mammoth skull of Balerion, the Black Dread. Its size was overwhelming, taking up the entirety of the room and leaving me in awe. Damn, that is one big dragon, I whispered to myself, marveling at the sheer scale of the ancient creature. Hiding my excitement, I approached the skull and placed my palm on its surface. Suddenly, a rush of information flooded my mind, threatening to overwhelm me. I nearly lost my footing but managed to remain standing and focused. However, I quickly realized that this was not the place to analyze the vast amount of data I had just received. I knew I had to get out of there and find a suitable space to sift through the mountain of information at my fingertips. Quickly making my way back to my room, I lay down on my bed, closing my eyes as I began to sort through the incredible wealth of knowledge I had collected. And as I sifted through the information, I came to two monumental conclusions that sent my mind reeling. The first and very obvious one was that now I could make my own dragon. While I could have made a dragon before, it would have been more trial and error and me stumbling in the dark along with years of work until I could finally have a decent dragon. But now that I had a template from the Black Dread himself, I could skip all the unnecessary attempts and start with the last step immediately. I could hardly contain my excitement as I thought about the possibilities that this new knowledge opened up for me. Now I was going to have to wait until I was out of King's Landing before I made my own dragon, for obvious reasons. In the meantime, my mind was consumed with the second conclusion I had reached. Dragons did not come to exist in this world naturally. Some lunatics in Valyria had used blood magic and a countless number of human sacrifices in a grand chimera-esque ritual using mainly fireworms and a multitude of other apex predators that I had no idea of what they were even called to create the very first dragon. It also turned out that the dragon's abilities were not just the result of biological processes, but rather actual magic. Most prominently, its fire breath was not the result of an organic fuel that ignited on exposure to air, but rather the dragon converted literal magic energy into fire. While my 21st century brain could not understand such a concept, my broken powers on the other hand seemed to understand it perfectly. This was just a small part of the puzzle though. The main part was the dragon's heart, which functioned in a way that was completely different from what I had expected. Instead of pumping blood, it acted like some kind of magic reactor, creating and pumping magic energy throughout the dragon's body. While I knew that this world had magic in it, I never thought that I would be able to wield it. I was content with the powers I had, even though I had somewhat reached the limits of what I could do without altering my physical appearance or going full-on Chimera Garden. But that was all about to change. With the newfound knowledge that I had gained from studying the dragon bones, I had unlocked a whole new level of understanding about magic. It was like a game changer, a sudden twist in the story that opened up a world of possibilities that I had never even considered. My powers, which I had previously thought were limited to the biological world, now had the ability to quantify and replicate magic, at least in ways that would still technically be called biology. It was an astounding revelation that left me reeling, as I tried to imagine all the incredible things I could now do. I can actually use magic now? I exclaimed with excitement and disbelief. Well, not now but soon. I laughed like a maniac, just like the day I had entered this world. Also probably meant that I would have to venture into Valyria to uncover more secrets, but that's a problem for another day. I couldn't wait to see what other discoveries and possibilities awaited me in this new world of magic. I spent the rest of the day studying and analyzing every bit of data I had collected, making a list of all the things I would need to do once I was out of the capital. My mind was racing with excitement as I thought about all the new paths and opportunities that lay ahead. I finally had a new purpose, and I focused solely on the task at hand. I spent a good few hours studying the new branch of knowledge I had just unlocked. Suddenly, one of my rats informed me of something interesting happening in the city. I had been waiting for this exact situation to happen, even though I didn't expect it to happen too soon. I was still riding high off my latest discovery, so I finally decided to do something I had been wanting to do for a long time. I guess it's time to make some holier-than-thou septons shit their pants. I make my way out of the keep and head to the market, casually waiting near the pyre for the commotion to start. I don't have to wait long as I see a mob approaching the market with a fat balding man with a crystal crown on his head who I assume is the High Septon at the lead, followed by a few more septons and a large group of small folk that soon fill up the street. We will not tolerate the heathen sorcerer's magic being cast on us, the High Septon yells, riling up the crowd. We, the followers of the Seven who are one, will not stand by and watch this blasphemy be committed. They try to extinguish the fire by throwing buckets of water at it, but the heat from the flames pushes everyone back before they can come anywhere close to it. They start throwing anything they can get their hands on into the flame, but it doesn't even flicker. I see the High Septon frown at his plan not working, but he then spots me standing near the pyre and smiles. The High Septon, though occupying a position of great religious significance, lacked true devotion. His ascension to power was achieved through cunning means, and he now sought to exploit his position for personal gain. When faced with the task of dealing with the white mage from the north, he would not have acted with such haste and directness. However, enticed by the promise of a handsome payment from interested parties, who had made it clear that a generous donation awaited him upon completion of this seemingly simple task, he felt encouraged to proceed. It had been very easy to rile up the small folk of King's Landing, but that's when the first problem appeared. The pyre was too hot, so no one could get very close to it. The only option was to throw water at it to put it out, but that had not been as effective as he had hoped. Even the mob taking charge and throwing anything they could find into the pyre seemed to only feed it. That's when he spotted the mage standing next to his pyre, and it seemed that the Seven had heard his prayers. It wasn't a problem if they could not put out the pyre. If he could get rid of the main problem itself, the rest would fall into place. He starts yelling, "Burn the mage in his pyre!" The crowd roars in agreement, their faces twisted in rage as they begin to move towards me. The mage raises his hand and speaks. "Stop. I am a mage, but I am also a healer. I built this pyre under the orders of the king to heal the sickness plaguing the city. I mean you no harm." Seeing the crowd hesitate, he steps forward. "Lies. He is a mage, he is using magic, and such powers must only belong to the gods, so he must be burned." The mage just shakes his head, still trying to look brave. "I don't condone violence, but if you come at me with the intent to harm, you will not like the consequences." He sneered. "You are a liar and a fraud. Burn the heretic, burn him and dash." His words died in his throat as the mage turned his gaze on him. He froze as if he had been plunged into an icy abyss. Light faded from his vision as darkness started to claim him, as if he were staring down a narrow corridor whose torches were being extinguished one by one. His body refused to move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't talk. He couldn't move. All he knew was darkness. Darkness and fear. He'd never felt this fear before. This bone-chilling, heart-clenching, all-encompassing fear there as quick as it came, the darkness and the fear passed, leaving him gasping for breath, and he noticed that he was on his knees. Breathing rapidly, he looked around desperately for help. That's when he noticed everyone who were in the vicinity were all on their knees looking at the mage in fear. "What? How? I looked at the terrified crowd barely able to stand on their knees in front of me. Some of them had even pissed their pants. I might have overdone it a little, I think to myself, but I can excuse it as it was the first time I had used that little trick on a group of people and I didn't know how well it would work. That little trick was something I had figured out about a year ago. To be brief, I created a lot of concentrated cortisol, a hormone that the body releases in stressful situations. In small doses it would only make someone feel stress and fear, but the amount I had released would shut down their bodies momentarily and make them feel like they were on the brink of death. That I struggled to contain my glee at the magnificent success of my first attempt at using the terror wave. I managed to replace it with a disinterested expression that I remained standing there. I knew the effects had worn off in a few seconds. But nobody seemed to have the balls to stand and leave. A few moments passed in silence and I tried not to appear awkward and ruin my badass moment. When I was very close to just leaving, I finally noticed a group of men approaching. The king led them, flanked by his king's guard. The king asked me to explain what had happened. I quickly recounted the events that led up to the mob forming and me using my powers to protect myself. The king listened attentively and then spoke to his king's guard. "Make sure the Septons are dealt with. They have overstepped their bounds and started this mess. I will speak with them personally." He then turned to me and said, "You have already done a lot to help my kingdom, healer. I will make sure your safety is guaranteed." Glancing at the trembling crowd still on their knees, he added, "Not that you seem to need it." I thank him and walk back to the Red Keep, happy with the show I had put on. As I walk towards my room, I notice a lot more people staring at me. They used to stare at me with awe, now there was a healthy dose of fear mixed in with it as well. Damn, I might have underestimated the range of the terror wave. From her balcony in her room, which had a perfect view of the city, Queen Cersei Lannister observed the hauntingly beautiful pyre burning in the middle of the marketplace, waiting for her plan to unfold. The White Mage of Winterfell was all everyone could talk about, but he was just a mere flavor of the moment. A nuisance that held no real power when compared to the true rulers of Westeros. However, she was forced to endure him for the day, as she was forced to hear her beloved husband go on and on about how his new friend from the north had healed the small folk of the city and gotten rid of the smell. While she could appreciate the healer for cleaning up her city, she didn't really care much about the lives of the small folk. Her husband, in his infinite wisdom, was going to give the savage from the north a lordship for his meager service to the crown, something he should be happy to just be given the opportunity to do. So she had hatched a perfect plan to show everyone that this so-called White Mage of Winterfell was nothing more than a court jester. She watches the High Septon in front of the mob, whose ears she had whispered into to follow her plan to reach the market. She smiles as she sees the healer in front of the pyre without his beast to protect him. She had not planned for this, but this would make her plans work even better. She smirks as she watches the mob rushes towards the defenseless mage. She says, "That should show the insolent mage how to." She grew confused as they suddenly stopped and kneeled in front of him. "Why are those peasants?" A gust of wind stopped her short. Her words died in her throat as she felt her breath freeze in her lungs, as if she was a little girl standing defenseless in front of a dragon. The mere thought of making a small whimper or even a twitch would be enough for the beast to devour her whole, and all she knew was fear. It was a paralyzing dread that she had never felt before. The pressure of it all stopped just as quickly as it came, leaving her feeling confused and scared. As she came to her senses, she realized she had fallen back into her chair, spilling her wine in the process. As she rose unsteadily to her feet, she was met with a daunting sight. The mage stood tall and unwavering, a towering figure amidst a cowering crowd of people who trembled on their knees in abject fear. His commanding presence seemed to fill the entire space, as if every inch of the room was imbued with his power. Despite the chaos and terror around him, the mage appeared utterly calm. His eyes remained fixed on the trembling masses before him, seemingly scanning their every thought and feeling, with an air of omniscience that both awed and terrified the onlookers. Chapter 13. After my first real display of power, I understand why people would get addicted to this feeling. The rush I felt as I looked at hundreds of people on their knees, looking at me in awe and fear, was something I would not forget anytime soon. And knowing that what I had used was barely a fraction of my power did not slip my mind either. I was already close to being at the top of the food chain in this world. It would only take me a thought to start the end of all life in this world. But that would be pretty pointless, so I was going to slowly escalate my show of power to make the players of this game feel like they had some hope before I showed that this was not a game they could ever win. That I initially did have some thoughts of taking the Iron Throne for myself, but that would be only fun until I got it, and actually taking care of the kingdom was going to get boring very fast. So my plan was to let the war that was going to start eventually start, or maybe start it myself if it was taking too long. Then I would just help whoever I liked get the throne and keep doing my own thing. I hadn't even planned on staying in Winterfell as long as I had, but living there was oddly peaceful. I had grown to like the cold. Nobody bothered me much and I had delegated most of my tasks to Freya. Now that I had a whole new direction of knowledge to explore, I couldn't wait to leave the capital and start to integrate magic into my body. I knew that after my latest display of power, a lot of people would be happy to have me leave the city as soon as possible. However, I had unfinished business in the city. I knew that someone high up in power probably enticed the High Septon to act, as he wouldn't have done so when he clearly knew I had the king's blessing in setting up the pyre. The only people who came to mind were Varys, Baelish, or Cersei. Now, for some reason, this didn't seem like Varys' method of operation. It was done very sloppily, so it was probably the other two. And among them I was leaning more towards Cersei. Did I wonder why the queen bitch herself would want me mobbed? I hadn't done anything against her. In fact, I thought that the vain cunt would actually appreciate not having to smell the city's waste all the time. Maybe I should kick the hornet's nest a bit more before leaving. Jon Arryn was frustrated and disturbed by the schemes he had been hearing about. Despite his efforts to stay informed, he often found out about them too late to take action. When he first heard about the healer's plan to set up a pyre, he was skeptical and even a little scared. But after seeing the results the next day, he couldn't deny the effectiveness of the healer's methods. The High Septon's stunt had caught Arryn off guard. He had expected some problems from the faith but nothing so brazen, and he realized that he needed to reevaluate what he knew about the healer. He was no longer the simple healer that everyone had expected him to be, and he couldn't help but shudder as he remembered the primal terror he had felt even though he was deep in the heart of the Red Keep. Initially, Jon had planned to give the healer a prominent position in the capital as a healer, knowing that the small folk would be overjoyed to have someone who could heal all ailments in the city. But after witnessing the healer's recent display of power, that idea was quickly scrapped. Instead, Jon knew that they needed to send the healer out of the capital as soon as possible, and as politely as possible. Not only for the sake of his own fear but also in hope that none of the her so-called players in the game would become too antsy with bruised egos and do something stupid that would anger the healer again. He hoped that Ned could keep the healer loyal to the crown while he was in the north. He wondered if Ned knew about the healer's true power, or if he had been kept in the dark as well. One good thing he had managed to figure out was that the healer, or rather the mage, didn't seem prone to violence. Based on the fact that it was the first time he had used such power and that too only when he was confronted, he genuinely believed that the mage could have killed everyone in that mob if he had wanted to. But he was relieved that the mage had shown restraint and didn't resort to violence. Now Robert's suggestion of giving him a lordship didn't sound so absurd. It would still be better to ask the healer himself what he wanted. Hopefully he wouldn't ask for something too outlandish. I find one of the balconies with a better view of the bay and sit on the edge, admiring the view. As I take in the peaceful scenery, I feel the hand of the king approach me. I look back to him, nodding my head in greeting. "Lord Hand, what brings you here this fine evening?" I ask, keeping my tone casual. That he nods his head at me, a hint of a smile on his face. "We haven't really talked to each other properly, Sir Healer. I thought I'd come by and get a good measure of the man who had all of King's Landing singing his praises one day, and shaking in fear at the mere mention of his name the next." I let out a snort, my smirk starting to show through. "So what's the latest rumor going around? I'm sure since it's been a few hours you've come across at least 10 by now." The hand chuckles. "You undersell yourself again. I've heard more than 10 just on my way here from my solar. Last I heard, you were the stranger's son who rebelled against the Seven and came down to the mortal plane to kill the devoted." I whistle in surprise. That sure escalated fast. The hand's smile fades and he looks at me seriously. "They do that most of the time, Healer. Although I can't call you that anymore, can I?" I shrug, still keeping my tone very casual. "You can call me whatever you want, Lord Hand, but I prefer to be called Elle." "Well then, Elle, I can tell from what I have observed that you are a straightforward person, so I will ask you this directly. What is your objective?" I hum and give the question some thought. I'll answer your question truthfully if you tell me what it is that you think I want. My first guess was the Iron Throne, but your actions have not been in that direction, so I genuinely do not know, the Lord Hand said, his tone curious, but I chuckled softly before responding. To be honest, the idea did cross my mind. There's no denying that the throne is a sight to behold, and it would be exhilarating to claim it through force. However, the truth is that once I sat on that throne, my life would become a never-ending cycle of monotony and frustration. The grandeur of the throne would be nothing more than a gilded cage, and I treasure my freedom far too much to be confined in such a way. So there is your answer, Lord Hand. My goal is to be free, and I came here in King's Landing to show all these so-called players of the great game, that you call them, that I don't really care much for their games. And whatever illusion of power they think they hold is nothing in front of true power. I wanted to show them a mere glimpse into what was waiting for them should they ever try to play their games on me. He looks like he had expected that answer, which somehow surprised me, I see. No wonder you have lived peacefully in Winterfell. Does Ned know how powerful you are? I haven't told him, but I'm sure he suspects. He doesn't like playing games, and he doesn't bother me much. He doesn't give me any orders that he knows I will not follow, I said with a hint of amusement. I see. Robert wanted to give you a lordship for your work in the capital, but judging by your answer, it is not something you would care for. So what do you think would be a fair payment for your work in the city? He asked, his tone becoming more serious. You are right in assuming that I wouldn't care for an existing lordship, but there is something I want, similar to that. It's something I haven't discussed with Lord Stark yet, but there is an uninhabited forest located in the northern mountains that I would like to claim. My aim is to acquire the entirety of the forest along with the surrounding mountains. I had been planning to approach Lord Stark about this matter, and having the approval of the king would undoubtedly expedite the process, I replied. An odd request, but one that can be easily granted, he said, nodding in agreement. To be honest, Lord Hand, this is not how I had expected our talk to go, I admitted, a hint of surprise in my voice, that he laughed. I'm sure you expected me to call you a heretic for harming the high septon of my faith and banish you from the kingdom under the threat of execution. Frankly, yes, I replied, a hint of amusement in my voice. I'd like to think that I'm old and wise enough to recognize a fool's errand when I see one. Now, if you would like to satisfy the curiosity of an old man, how powerful are you? He asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. That I contemplated the question and thought of a way to answer it. I do not think King's Landing is ready for another show of my power, Lord Hand, so if you would humor me, let me show you a different form of power, one that you are intimately familiar with, I suggested, a hint of a challenge in my voice. Go on, he says, intrigued by my proposition. It's simple. I will ask you some questions pertaining to the realm. Please give them some thought, I explained. Before the rebellion happened, you and I both know that the Targaryens lived quite a lavish lifestyle with no shortages of tourneys and celebrations, and still had overflowing treasuries. I begin. He nods. Yes, that would be a fair assumption. So my question to you is, why is it that after the new king took the throne, the kingdom is suddenly in serious debt? While I don't doubt the new royal family lives more lavishly than the last, it is quite an achievement to completely empty a 300-year-old dynasty's treasury in less than a decade on just ale, whores, and tourneys, I say, my voice carrying a hint of sarcasm. He frowns as he considers my words. While I'm not going to ask you how you know of the kingdom's finances, are you telling me that there is foul play at hand? I'm not telling you anything, Lord Hand. I'm just asking you some questions. After all, coin does not just disappear. It has to go somewhere, I reply, trying to keep my tone neutral. Now let us assume for a moment that there is some foul play at hand. If so, then who would be the first person to find out about such an issue? The Master of Coin, he says, his expression serious. I smirk. Yes, the Master of Coin, Peter Baelish, or Littlefinger, or the man who can rub 2 coppers together to make a gold coin. Now, if someone's been stealing from the crown and the man responsible for the coin doesn't know anything about it, then there are only 2 conclusions that I can come to. One is that Peter Baelish is very incompetent, or I trail off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. That is a serious implication, he said, his frown deepening. I'm not implying anything, Lord Hand. I'm just sharing some thoughts that I had in exchange for the wonderful conversation that you have provided me with, I say with a wide smile on my face. Before he can ask me any more questions, I get off the ledge and make my way into the keep. Have a good day, Lord Hand. You don't have to worry about me causing any more problems in the city. I'll be leaving tomorrow, I say, trying to sound nonchalant, but inside I was giggling like a kid who had just thrown a rock at a beehive. Chapter 14. Peter Baelish had not been having a good time ever since that blasted mage set foot in the capital. He was furious that his fake medicine-selling business, which was meant to bring him more coin, had crashed, and his plan to steal the pills that the healer was supposed to bring had gone up in smoke. But now he was glad he had been patient and not gone through with his more obvious plans of getting rid of the healer. He realized that those plans probably wouldn't have worked, and he may have even been caught doing so. He had been wanting to get rid of the healer ever since he had confirmed the rumors about him. His work was enriching the North by bringing in a huge influx of small folk and merchants who came there for his healing, and that did not play well into his plans. The latest incident in the capital had caused a lot of turmoil. He hadn't felt such fear for his life ever since Brandon Stark had nearly killed him years ago. His spies had not given him any indication that he was capable of such feats. It had been unexpected, but the incident did give him an opportunity to sow discord in the North. He had sent a raven to Caitlin after he had first heard rumors about the sorcerer and subtly asked her to confirm them. She had given him a lot of information about the mage. He had been feeding her unease about the mage, but that had stopped working a few moons back after the mage had apparently cured her youngest spawn of his fever. But now that the entire capital had felt what the mage was capable of, he could use that to his advantage. He would send a version of the story that subtly painted the healer as someone who attacked the followers of the Seven. Yes, that should work perfectly, Baelish thought to himself with a sly grin. Cersei Lannister slammed the door shut behind the last of the servants, leaving her alone with her brother Jaime. She paced the room, her hands twitching as she struggled to control the terror that still gripped her heart. "Cersei, what's wrong?" Jaime asked, concern etched on his face. "I felt that dread too, but you seem to be taking it much harder." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. That mage, he unleashed his powers, and it was terror like I've never felt before. "I was going to go and take care of him," Jaime said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "But you stopped me." "Why?" "He might be able to use magic, but I highly doubt he would be able to cast any spells with a blade sticking out of his gut." "No, Jaime," Cersei said, her voice shaking. "You didn't see what I saw." The entire mob that the Septon had riled up just fell to their knees in terror. He was never bothered by them. He could have just killed them as easily. If you go charging in with your sword, you will meet the same fate. He needs to be dealt with in other ways, with poison or assassins. But first we have to kick him out of my city. I won't be able to sleep in peace knowing that he is that close to us. "You're right," Jaime said, his expression grim. "We can't let him pose a threat to our rule. I'll send a raven to father and maybe even hire the faceless men to take care of him." "Yes, that's exactly what we need to do," Cersei said, her determination returning. "We can't let him continue to do whatever he wants in my kingdom and threaten us." Cersei sat down in her chair, her mind racing with thoughts of how to protect her children and her throne from that feral mage. She would make him feel the same fear that she had felt. After all, a Lannister always pays their debts. After my conversation with the Hand, I set out from the Red Keep and headed towards the Kingswood, where I sensed Fenrir was taking a nap. The talk had been honestly different from what I had expected. The Hand was not what I thought he would be, and it was clear why he was able to overthrow the Targaryens and keep the kingdom running smoothly under a seemingly uninterested king. He was able to analyze the curveball I had thrown at people's belief and understanding of power, and adapted to it in just a few hours. That's why I threw another curveball at him, to see how he would handle it. If he isn't careful in dealing with Baelish, he might not make it to the start of the plot. Speaking of Baelish, that sneaky little weasel was starting to annoy me. Firstly, his face was one of those that just automatically made you want to punch him, and secondly, I found out that it was he who was selling the fake pills in my name. He had made a significant amount of money in the short time it took me to come here, so I set Jon Arryn on his tail. He was totally going to be on his case from now on. That was only half of my revenge. The next part was just mostly for my amusement. Since the hundreds of rats I had spread throughout the city were idle after completing their previous task, I sent them to find where Littlefinger had hidden all the gold he had stolen. It was surprisingly easy, as rats are excellent diggers. They quickly uncovered where he had buried the gold. It was directly under his brothels. Now that was just lazy, I doubt it was all of it, but it was enough to make him start panicking. I then instructed the rats to move the gold to a different part of the city, and bury it somewhere in a deeper hole that only I could find, in case I needed the gold in the future. I took a few hundred gold coins for myself, just in case I needed to spend it somewhere. I had accomplished all my objectives in King's Landing and more. I hadn't given much thought to what the king would reward me for my services, but owning the forested mountain would prove extremely useful for my private, grisly experiments without fear of discovery. I doubt Stark would refuse me, considering he still owed me a favor for the glassmaking process. Legally owning my own experimental grounds would help avoid problems when others start poking their noses into my business, and more importantly, it would be the best place to create and raise my dragon. Now, all I had to do in the capital was probably present myself in the throne room to receive my reward and politely be told to fuck off. Walking into the small council chamber, which looked more packed than normal, Robert Baratheon lets his annoyance be known to everyone the moment he sits down. I haven't been called to this many meetings since the rebellion. What the hell is the matter now? You know what, that's a stupid question. I know exactly what the matter is about. His shrew of a wife is the first to start screeching, "You must have this mage put to death. He used such malicious magic on the entire city. Who knows what he'll do next?" She abandons her typical covert insults and openly attacks the mage that he couldn't see why she was overreacting so much. He himself had felt the wave of fear, but he was quite far away from the market. It was pretty similar to the feeling he got when he was in the middle of a hunt or battle, so it only took him a few moments to shrug it off. But after looking at the state of the mob, with most of them trembling on their knees and pissing themselves, he realized that maybe the ones closest to the mage probably took the brunt of it. The mage had not appeared to have cast a powerful spell. He was just standing in front of them nonchalantly, completely unperturbed by everything going on around him, as if he knew there was no way anyone in the city could touch a single hair on his head. He still remembered the conversation he had with Selmy after their first meeting with the mage. "That's something I've noticed about the mage too, Selmy. There's something odd about the way he acts," he said. "I've noticed that too, Your Grace. What's unsettling about him is that he walks around with complete abandon, especially in the Red Keep." "I've never seen anyone act so carelessly," Selmy replied. "Why do you think that is?" he asked. "I'm not entirely sure, Your Grace, but my guess is that either he doesn't care if he lives or dies, or he's completely confident that nothing in King's Landing can harm him. Knowing his abilities, it's probably the latter," Selmy said. After that enlightening conversation, he started paying more attention to the mage's behavior and came to the same conclusion. Nobody walked around the Red Keep with that level of self-confidence, and the smile that was always present on his face seemed to imply that he knew something that nobody else did. Returning to the present, he noticed that the cunt was still speaking, so he slammed his hand on the table to silence her because he had heard enough. "You have made your point very clear to everyone at this table. Now stop bloody screaming. What are you even doing in a small council meeting? Last I checked, you don't have a seat here." Cersei rears her head back as if she's physically struck. "I am the Queen of the Sev. And I am the bloody king, so either sit down and keep your mouth shut or I'll have you thrown out." He roars back at her. "If anyone else has any bright ideas to execute the mage who has merely followed my orders and defended himself against idiots without causing any physical harm, go ahead, but make sure to inform him that you are acting independently so that the rest of the city is not held accountable for your foolishness. So Cersei, go ahead. I know you want to execute him. Send the Kingslayer to challenge him to a trial by combat," he taunted. Cersei falls silent and sits down, seething with anger. He would have been worried about getting stabbed in his sleep, but they haven't slept in the same room for a long time. Seeing her finally shut up and no one else willing to speak, he says, "That's what I thought. Now, is there anything else we need to discuss, or are we done?" That's when Jon starts. "One last matter, Robert. I had a quite enlightening conversation with the mage just before this meeting, where I discussed the rewards with him. I thought we agreed to give him a lordship of his choosing. Well, I thought it would be better to just ask him what he wanted." "What does he want then?" "He doesn't want a lordship where he would have to be responsible for the people under his care. He told me he would much rather have the deed for an uninhabited forest in the north." He frowns. "I can understand him not wanting to deal with people, but shouldn't that be something he needs to discuss with Ned first?" "Yes, he told me he's planning on talking to Ned about that, but having the Crown's approval would help him get it faster." "Fine, write up something saying that as long as Ned agrees, he can have his forest." Wait, does that mean he's planning on leaving soon? He asks, sounding intrigued. Yes, he informed me that he has duties to attend to in the north and doesn't want to cause any further trouble with the faith in the city, John explains. He's at least considerate. If only his departure would silence the faith's whining, he says, sounding frustrated. He gets up from his seat. That's all the patience I have for today. I need a drink now. As he exits the room with Barristan following him, he thinks, maybe it's time for a private chat with the mage. If John's words are true, it will be interesting at the very least. Chapter 15. I spent my time, as usual, in my room, making notes on the different organs in the dragon that worked of magic and their functionalities from the information I had gained from the dragon bones. Suddenly, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Barristan Selmy standing there. Sir Healer, the king would like to have a private chat with you, he said respectfully. Sure, lead the way, I replied, following him. So what does the king want from me? I asked. He has learned that you will be leaving tomorrow and wanted to have a dialogue, Barristan replied. Ah, by the way, there has been something that has always bothered me. Do the King's Guard always have 7 members? Yes, that has always been the case, he replied. But doesn't it make more sense to have like 2 or 3 guards per member of the royal family? I asked. While your idea makes more sense and has merit, there are other factors to consider when choosing the number, Barristan replied. Ah, politics and preachers, I suppose, I said. He just smiled and didn't say much after that. We reached the room where the king was waiting for me while drinking some ale. You called for me, your grace, I asked, offering a small bow. The king raised an eyebrow, his expression growing serious. Why do you do that? I was taken aback by his question. I'm sorry, your grace? The kneeling, the bowing, the whole facade you keep putting on, he said, his tone growing more annoyed. I took a moment to consider my answer, choosing to be candid. To be truthful, your grace, I don't mind the act of kneeling or bowing. I wasn't born into nobility and don't see myself as one. I don't possess the arrogance that prevents nobles from showing deference to those less powerful than themselves. I bow because it's a simpler option than dealing with the annoyances that will follow if I don't do so. Is that the same reason you have kept the act of being just a healer? The king asked. I am mainly just a healer, whether you believe me or not. But I do have a few tricks up my sleeve. After all, I would be a poor mage if I didn't, I replied with amusement. He snorted. Sure you are, he said. Are you certain I can't convince you to stay in King's Landing? It's quite refreshing talking to you instead of all the sycophants living here. I'll have to disappoint you in that regard, your grace. I hate this place more than you do, and I've quite grown to like the cold. And I'm sure that if I stay here for another day, the city will probably be set on fire by someone trying to kill me or pissing me off. You're definitely onto something. If no one else, I'm sure my wife is going to try something. Really? I don't recall interacting with the queen, let alone doing something to slight her. I asked in genuine surprise. Well, you just answered your own question, he told me. The cunt probably got mad that you didn't try to suck up to her. That really stopped me short. I knew she was self-centered, but seriously, well, then it'll probably be best if I leave as fast as possible, I said. Why? You scared of some Lannisters, mage? He asked, more amused. Not really. I just don't trust myself to keep my mouth shut in front of people with very elevated opinions about themselves, and like to keep reminding everyone, I replied dryly. He snorted at that. Shame. I would have paid good money to watch that. He then reached for one of the scrolls on the table and passed it to me. Here's your reward for your services to the crown. As long as Ned agrees to it, that forest is yours. Thank you, I said, accepting my reward. Are you sure that's all you want? He asked. Yes, your grace, there isn't much you can give me that I need, I replied, with a shrug of my shoulders. Very well then, the king said, his tone hinting at disappointment. When do you plan to leave? I'm planning to leave at dawn tomorrow, I replied. I've completed all my tasks here and my journey to King's Landing has given me much to think about and do, so it's best I get to that as soon as possible. Ah, but before you go, the king interjected, his eyes alight with mischief. There will be a feast tonight in your honor, a celebration of your services to the crown. I chuckled at the king's request. Are you sure, your grace? I asked, my voice tinged with amusement. I doubt many in the Red Keep will be happy to attend such a feast in my honor. Nonsense, the king replied with a chuckle. It will be the most entertaining feast yet, and it's the least I can do to show my gratitude." "Very well, Your Grace," I finally said, a smirk playing at the corners of my mouth. "I will be happy to attend the feast tonight." I left the king's chambers with a sly grin on my face, excitement buzzing through me at the thought of the feast that was to come. This would be my final chance to create a stir in the capital, and I was sure that I would be the center of attention. Everyone would be looking to get a piece of me, to figure out my secrets or win my favor. The idea of being surrounded by the power-hungry elite of the Red Keep was tantalizing, and I couldn't help but relish the thought of playing my last game in this grand arena. I halted my steps, taking a moment to reflect on my inner thoughts. It was then that I realized that I was entertaining the thoughts of a megalomaniac. Was a mere 2 days in King's Landing corrupting me? Back in Winterfell, I would have never thought such thoughts. But my time here seemed to be changing me in ways I never could have imagined. I knew that I needed to leave this city soon before I went full emo. "Damn it," I muttered to myself. "Old habits certainly die hard. It appears that I'm still unconsciously adapting my behavior to fit in with my surroundings." Lord Tywin Lannister, head of House Lannister, Warden of the West and father of the Queen, was sitting in his solar seat in the great castle of Casterly Rock, going over some concerning letters he had received from his daughter and spies in King's Landing. The letters talked about the newest sensation spreading across the realm, the mysterious figure known as the White Mage of Winterfell, whose miraculous healing powers had caused quite a stir across the continent. According to the letters, this person was more than just a simple healer, and if the letters from his daughter were to be believed, this mage was growing in power. Tywin had heard about the mage's work in Winterfell but hadn't given it much thought. However, as time went by, he started hearing more and more disturbing news from the north, with many small folk and traders either shifting to the north or visiting it to receive healing from the mage, which was enriching the otherwise isolated part of the realm. The other surprising news from the north was its rising glass trade, which even had the Myrish worried about their new competition on their existing monopoly. He didn't know how the northerners had gotten their hands on the method to make glass, but they had been doing a good job of keeping it under wraps. Tywin had his suspicions that it was the healer who had provided the Starks with the method, because the healer apparently did not have the accent of anyone from Westeros and could be from Myr.as for the rumored healer. Tywin was initially skeptical. However, after seeing firsthand the completely healed spies, some of whom he had scarred himself to test their healing, he was eventually convinced of the healer's extraordinary abilities. Despite his impressive talents, Tywin wasn't overly concerned about the healer's potential impact on a potential war with the North. After all, he was only one person and could be dealt with accordingly if necessary. The recent news from King's Landing was concerning, however. The healer had everyone fooled, and he was never a simple healer but was actually a mage, who was probably growing in power by healing people. Tywin had initially thought the healer was a simpleton for only charging a silver for healing, but it could be possible that the healer didn't care about the money, and it was just a distraction. The healer wanted as many people as possible to come to him for healing so he could get more powerful by using his magic on them. Now the healer was powerful enough that he didn't need to hide anymore. Now, if the letters were to be believed, he was no longer a simple healer, but a mage who could send entire armies to their knees with ease, and with a bit more effort, he could probably kill an entire army. He could no longer just sit back and treat this like a minor issue. He needed to act now. The mage was too powerful to be left in the hands of potential enemies, so he either had to entice him to join the Lannisters or have him eliminated. But before doing either of those, he needed to get better information on the mage. Something better than whatever the shite his daughter had written about him. "Come in," he said as he heard a knock on the door. He sees Tyrion enter his solar. The younger Lannister took a seat in front of him. Tywin handed him the letters he had received from King's Landing. Tyrion skimmed the contents of the letters, a smirk forming on his face as he read. "It's been a while since my dear sister has been this colorful in insulting someone other than me," he said with a chuckle. "I wish I could meet this mage just to see how he managed to make her so angry." "Well, you are in luck because I have a task for you, Tyrion," he continued. "You will go north under the guise of needing healing. Maybe he can cure your dwarfism, but your main task will be to find out everything about him. Find out how we can entice him to work for the Lannisters and also discover his weaknesses." "Wow, you sure have your priorities in order," Tyrion said sarcastically. "You haven't really allowed me out of Casterly Rock in so long, and you want your disgrace to handle such an important task?" Disgrace you may be, but you're still a Lannister, so you will do as you are told, Tywin reminded him sternly. You leave on the morrow. Tyrion sighed but stood up from his seat. Very well, father. I will set off tomorrow as you wish. Good, Lord Tywin nodded, satisfied. This is a critical mission, Tyrion. The information you gather will be instrumental to the success of our family. Tyrion left the Solar, his mind already racing with plans and strategies for his journey north. He was eager to travel after being confined for so long, and deep down, he had a glimmer of hope that this healer could make him normal, even though he had come to terms with his short stature long ago. He had heard tales of the great healer and his legendary powers, and he couldn't wait to see if it was all true. The next day, he set off on his mission with a small entourage of men. He knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but he was determined to succeed, and with that, Tyrion Lannister, the Lannister disgrace, set off on a journey that would change the course of his life forever, even though he didn't know it yet. Chapter 16. I stood outside the Grand Hall where a feast was being held in honor of the city's recent purification from the plague. I was the guest of honor, and as such I had to make a grand entrance. Fashionable lateness was the law. After all, that I was dressed to impress, or at least as impressively as I could with my non-existent wardrobe. I doubted having my actual wardrobe would have even helped. The guards outside the door noticed my presence and promptly opened the door, causing all eyes to fall upon me. As I entered the room, I was met with familiar faces, but unlike last time, something was different. The expressions on their faces were no longer filled with a mix of curiosity and disdain like the last time I was in the throne room. Instead, I could see fear and terror etched upon their faces as they relived the dread they had experienced just a day prior. Despite their attempts to hide their emotions, I could see right through them, and I couldn't help but smirk at the change in their behavior. Where did all that haughtiness go? The king was the first to greet me. Well, look who is finally here. He sounded a bit annoyed that I was late, as he had been looking forward to the drama that was going to unfold after my arrival. He then called me up to the high table and gave me a seat in between him and Jon. Wow, I was moving up in the world. By the look on the hand's face, he seemed like he wanted to talk about the hot potato I had dropped in his lap. Did I look around and spot Littlefinger at a lower table, still smiling. So Jon probably hasn't confronted him directly. I'm almost disappointed, but that is probably the smart way to deal with the situation. He will need evidence and look for the stolen money before any accusations can be thrown around. Judging by the relaxed face of Littlefinger, he had not noticed his missing wealth as well. Damn it, that's more disappointing. I wanted to watch him panic. As soon as I take my seat, the king stands up and raises a toast. To the White Mage of Winterfell, the man who saved the lives of half the capital and is also the sole reason that King's Landing doesn't smell like shit for the first time in centuries. The second part of the toast got a lot more enthusiastic cheers than the first part, which was pretty messed up to be honest, but also expected. It reminded me that I needed to activate the kill switch on the shit-eating bacteria before I left the city. No matter how much I trusted my safety precautions, it was probably a good idea to pull the plug, as I wouldn't be here to fix anything if things started to go wrong. It probably meant that the city was going to start smelling like shit again in a few years, but that wouldn't be my problem anymore. Did I plan to send out the signal for them to kill each other and then themselves tonight, and everything should be done by the time I leave tomorrow. After some casual conversation with the king, he got drunk and was distracted by the maids giving him alcohol. I turned to Jon and asked casually, "So how enlightening was our earlier conversation?" He obviously knew what I was talking about, so he also started talking vaguely, as a feast was not a good place to discuss confidential information. I've given it some thought and found some discrepancies, but I will need more time to put everything together so that the opportunity doesn't slip by if I start without proper confirmation, he said. I hummed a little disappointingly at the lost opportunity of getting to watch the drama, but it was the correct way to get things done properly, so credit to that. I guess I would have to settle for hearing the story of how that went down at a later date. I would call someone uninvolved in the issue but still competent and trustworthy to do the task. I suggested that he considered my advice and replied, "Finding someone with the first two characteristics might be simple enough, but trust is a scarce resource here." "You have a point. There's not much I can help with that," I said, shrugging. "It's fine. You've been enough help in pointing out the issue," he said, and that was the end of that discussion. I didn't mind the silence after that, and by the looks on everyone's faces around us, I could tell that they were curious about what we were discussing but had the tact to not ask. Looking at some more faces, I could tell that they had different issues they wanted to talk to me about. I decided to get the food out of the way in case I didn't get a chance later and start eating. The food was pretty good. They had a wider range of spices available than what was found in Winterfell. A server approached me and asked if I wanted some wine. I thought, why not? I had tried the wine available here, and while it wasn't as good as some of the wine I had in my previous life, it was better than I had expected. The server filled my cup and moved on. I took a sip to taste it and immediately realized what had just happened. I had tasted the wine in this world before. What I had just been served barely had enough wine to make it the right color. The rest of it was poison, a very concentrated version. I hadn't done much research on poisons in this world, but based on the way it was rapidly trying to swell and clench my throat muscles to suffocate me, I could safely assume it was the strangler. Just as I came to this conclusion, my enhanced biology went to work immediately. It isolated the poison and started breaking it down into harmless components and healed the very little damage that had been done to some of my throat muscles, which was surprising, but it was probably due to the concentration of the poison that I didn't really mind it much. I only had a little irritation in my throat. Even if it had succeeded in restricting my airway, it wouldn't have achieved much because, while I did need oxygen, I could easily breathe through my skin due to my somewhat redundant biology. Just as my body goes to work on fixing the mild nuisance, I take a subtle glance around the room. Very little time had elapsed, and the cup was still at my lips, so no one had yet noticed anything amiss. However, my quick glance was enough to identify who had attempted to poison me. The queen was trying hard to conceal the smirk that had appeared on her face the moment the cup touched my lips. Meanwhile, the server who had poured me my wine was attempting to leave the room quickly and inconspicuously. I had several options on how to deal with the situation, but I went with the option that any sane man would do if they were in my place. Slowly, I brought the cup down from my lips but still held it in my hand and called out to the server. He stopped in his tracks and looked back at me. I could see from my peripheral vision that his face was contorted in contemplation about whether he should start running, but when he looked at me and saw that I was fine, he probably assumed that I hadn't drunk it yet, so he hadn't been caught. Slowly, he walked towards me, thinking that I hadn't figured out what was going on. Did I stop paying attention to the server and look at the queen, who still has a smug look on her face, but is slowly realizing that something was wrong? Did I lock eyes with her and down the entire cup of poison in one go? I see the disbelief and horror spreading across her face. And it's a better high than any I've experienced before. Did I raise the empty cup in a salute towards her and never break my gaze? I flash a smirk and say, that was the best fucking wine I've ever had. Fill me another cup and leave the bottle. Like an absolute legend, I'm too busy relishing the shock, disbelief, and horror spreading across the queen's face to care about the server's reaction. Did I hear the king laugh at my proclamation and say, now you're talking, healer. And here I thought that living in Winterfell had made you dull. The queen breaks our gaze first and looks down. I can see that she is terrified, as evidenced by her trembling hands. I look around the room and see that the only people who know what has just happened are me and the queen. The server has turned tail and disappeared, but I doubt he'll get far. Cersei wouldn't let any ing tie back to her, especially since it was a failed assassination attempt. I stopped looking at the queen for now, not wanting anyone else to notice what had just happened or misinterpret the situation. I look back at the king and say, I don't know what gave you that idea, your grace. I can assure you that I am the life of a party. The king replied in disbelief, you say that, but I have yet to see you drink properly. His challenging tone brought back memories of my college days. Instead of replying, I grabbed the bottle of poison and downed it in a few seconds, mostly out of reflex and also to prevent anyone else from accidentally drinking it. I wipe my mouth, act a little tipsy, and say with a slight slur, is that proof enough, your graces? While I could temporarily shut down my body's ability to break down alcohol instantly to actually get drunk, there was no fucking way I was going to be even slightly drunk in the middle of this viper's nest, especially minutes after I had just been poisoned. From that point on, as you can imagine, the king and I got into a drinking contest. He lasted longer than I expected, and I continued to act more drunk as the night went on. I should get an Oscar for this, I thought to myself. That a lot of people had approached me to talk after they saw my drunken state. Littlefinger was one of them. He tried to extract information from me through seemingly innocent questions, credit where credit was due, he was quite good at it. But I just continued to act more drunk and give him meaningless answers. Eventually, he saw the encounter as a lost cause and just left, while trying to hide his frustration. The queen I had noticed had left slightly earlier than it was polite to do so, but everyone was too drunk to care or notice. After a few hours of drinking, most of the people had left. I looked at the quiet hall and saw that a few of the guests had passed out on the tables and the floors. The king had just been hauled out by 2 king's guards, and I decided it was time to leave as well. As I made my way back to my room, still acting drunk, I realized something. The Strangler was surprisingly fucking tasty, and I might have to try it again sometime. I couldn't help but snort. That's probably the first time anyone has said that sentence in this world. Just as I opened the door to my room, I realized that someone unexpected was waiting for me inside. Chapter 17. As I lay in bed, I pondered the circumstances that led to this situation. I had finished everything I had planned to do in the capital, and now, a few hours before I planned to leave, I had fucked up. With a heavy sigh, I turned my gaze to the left, where the source of my vexation lay sprawled naked in my bed, still unconscious. Memories of the previous night flooded my mind. The moment I entered my room after I finally stopped acting drunk, I saw that I was not alone. Sitting on my bed with a lustful expression on her face was the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms, draped in a sheer garment that could barely be considered a robe. As I entered, I noticed a flicker of fear cross her face, but she quickly concealed it behind a mask of lust that didn't seem entirely fabricated, given the shock she must have felt during the feast earlier. She was understandably drunk. As I tried to comprehend the situation, she rose from the bed and sauntered towards me with an enticing gait. She stood before me, her gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment we simply stared at each other in silence. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart racing as I struggled to understand what was happening. Then, with a sultry smile, she spoke. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, her voice low and husky. I paused, considering my next move. I was aware of her methods, attempting to manipulate me through seduction after her previous attempts to have me assassinated failed. However, before I can form a response, she moves closer, pressing her body against mine. The heat from her skin radiates through the sheer fabric of her robe, and the fragrance of her perfume is irresistible. I am caught off guard by her boldness, but I cannot deny the attraction I feel towards her. In that moment, I was torn between desire and caution. On the one hand, I was acutely aware of the potential consequences of succumbing to my carnal desires, plus this bitch was obviously crazy. Who else was mad enough to try to sleep with someone they had just attempted to assassinate, while also failing and getting caught by said person? On the other hand, it was always the crazy ones that were the kinkiest, so the sex was definitely going to be mind-blowing. As I struggled to make a decision, she reached up and ran her fingers through my hair, pulling me closer for a kiss. I didn't offer much resistance, and as our lips met, I was consumed by a fiery passion that threatened to overwhelm me entirely. The kiss was intense, our bodies pressed together as we explored each other's mouths with our tongues. I could feel the heat building within me, and I knew that I was quickly losing control. It was at this point that I decided to throw caution to the wind and take full advantage of the situation. I lifted her up, she quickly wrapped her legs around my waist, and I carried her back to the bed. We continued making out furiously as I laid her down on the bed. She gazes up at me with a look of lust and pride, and slowly lets her robe slip from her shoulders. Her eyes gleam with a challenge. "I imagine someone as young and powerful as you would love to prove their prowess to the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms, right here in the heart of her castle," she says with a smirk. I was going to wipe that smirk from her face, and show her what it feels like to be truly pleasured. With my powers, I make her nerve endings hypersensitive, and I can see her eyes widen as I kiss her and begin to tantalize her nipples. The thrill of dominating her is a rush like no other, and my only goal now was to make her scream with pleasure. I continue to explore her body, using my powers to make each touch, kiss, and caress more intense than the last. She moans with pleasure, her body responding to my every touch. I can feel her arousal growing, and I know that I am about to take her over the edge. With each movement, I can feel the tension building inside of her, until she finally erupts in a climax that leaves her gasping for breath. I continue to pleasure her, drawing out her orgasm until she is a quivering, satisfied mess in my arms. As she catches her breath, I lean in close, whispering in her ear, "You were almost right, Queen Circe. I am a young mage, and while I do love proving my prowess to a beautiful woman like any other man," I kiss her once more before continuing, "what I love more than anything is to show arrogant sluts like you their rightful place." I look at her face as she comes out of her post-orgasmic haze and comprehend what I had just said to her. Her expression contorts into anger, and before she has a chance to speak, I pull her body to me, spread her legs and shove my cock deep into her wet folds. Whatever she was going to say is lost as she screams wordlessly, and I watch her back arch as I fully sheathe myself inside her. As she was lost in pleasure, I took a moment to fully appreciate the work of art that she was. I couldn't help but be entranced by the luster of her long, wavy hair, reminiscent of shimmering strands of pure gold. Her exquisite face, highlighted by those enchanting green eyes, left me in awe. Her every curve was in perfect harmony, enticing and alluring. She had legs that seemed to go on forever, legs that were currently wrapped around my waist, trying to keep me deep inside her as I pulled my hips back. It was a sight to behold, and I savored every moment. I leaned over to suck on her breasts as I continued to mold her insides to fit my dick perfectly while making her feel things that she had never felt before. When I notice her fingernails trying to claw their way into my back unsuccessfully, I feel that she was close, so I push her over the edge by biting her nipple, and her walls clamp down on my dick. Her loud moan echoes through the room, and I see her eyes roll back into her head as she passes out, her brain unable to handle the pleasure her hypersensitive nerves were sending her. Did I wake her up with a simple use of my powers? I didn't give you permission to pass out, did I? Especially since I'm not done with you, and continue thrusting inside her without any mercy.
If you want to enjoy the rest of the chapters, go to my Patreon. Link is in the first pinned comment.